Hi, Thom Hartmann. Hey, my new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. We're having a coronavirus-safe book tour. I'll be at Powell's virtual bookstore event in conversation with David Corton, Tuesday, August 25th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Go to powells.com and get your tickets for the live stream event. And on Friday, September 4th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, I'll be at a Town Hall Seattle virtual event, and you can get your tickets for that live stream event at townhallseattle.org. There are also links at thomhartmann.com. I'll be taking you from the birth of America through FDR to the Reagan Revolution and today. In the foreword of my book, Ralph Nader says, "This is the most important, dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. So be sure to go to thomhartmann.com and sign up for one of these two great virtual book signings. Powell's in Portland and Town Hall Seattle. Don't miss it and sign up now. Tag You're It.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by yours truly. This is from Chapter 1, The Unholy Alliance of Racism, Genocide, and Guns. In Isaiah 14:21, the Lord tells Isaiah, "Prepare for his sons a place of slaughter because of the iniquity of their fathers." It's a variation on the old story of karma and seems in a very real way to be playing out today in the United States. America is facing an epidemic. Public health officials use that word of gun-related suicides, accidents, and even homicides and police killings. That epidemic has grown worse in the past decade, largely because the number of guns in America has increased, in large part because of the racial fears of white men who have bought guns in record numbers for 8 years during the time in office of America's first black president. A landmark 1999 study from researchers Franklin Zimmerman and Gordon Hawkins showed that the main correlation, far surpassing mental illness, socioeconomic status, or race, that could be defined as causal in predicting the rates of gun deaths is a simple number: the number of guns distributed among society. In the 30 years since that study, Zimmerman and Hawkins' results have been replicated and reanalyzed dozens of times. As the American Academy of Pediatrics said in a release published in AAAS's Science magazine, quote, "New research shows dramatic differences in the number of children hospitalized and killed each year in the U.S. from firearm-related injuries based on their state's gun legislation, even after adjusting for poverty, unemployment, and education rates. It found twice as many pediatric firearm deaths in states with the most lenient gun regulations compared to states where gun laws are strictest," end quote. They added that this is a critical issue for children, quoting Stephanie Cho, MD, the lead author of the abstract, quote, Firearm-related injuries are the second leading cause of death among children in the United States. But we found a clear discrepancy in where those deaths happen that corresponds with the strengths of states' firearm legislation. In states with lenient laws, children die at alarmingly greater rates, end quote. And unsurprisingly, America not only has unusually lenient gun laws, but also has more guns in civilian hands than any other country in the world. America has a bit more than 4% of the world's population, but holds almost 50% of all the guns in civilian hands worldwide, more than 390 million guns. And the more guns a society has, the more gun deaths it will experience. The NRA and their army of lobbyists have been quite successful in making this happen. During Obama's presidency, there was a steady and hysterical drumbeat of articles, emails, and political proclamations by so-called pro-gun politicians and think tanks, suggesting that Obama was preparing to take away everyone's guns at any minute. There was even a subtext embraced by the hard right that he wasn't going to stop there. After disarming white Americans, these folks said, Obama was going to intern them in otherwise unused FEMA camps. Flipped-out gun owners were repeatedly arrested during the Obama years trying to break into retired or temporarily vacant military facilities and toxic waste sites, looking for evidence to prove that Obama was, in fact, preparing the modern-day version of the World War II-era Japanese internment camps. White supremacy was the founding notion of this nation. White Europeans thought themselves so superior to the human beings they met here in 1492 that Columbus himself became the first North American slaver, shipping Taino Indians back to Spain as slaves to the royal family. A slave is as good as gold, Columbus wrote for the king and queen. Europeans in the Americas then stepped up that game into a hemisphere-wide campaign of racial genocide, pulling off the largest multi-generational mass murder in the history of the world. In the midst of that effort, they also created the legal mechanisms necessary to define and legally regulate slavery, and even built those systems into America's founding document, the Constitution. America was birthed in slavery and genocide, and both needed guns. It was the superior weaponry of guns that gave the European settlers a massive advantage over the bow and arrow-equipped Native Americans, and it was the raw power of widespread white ownership of guns in the South that propped up the institution of slavery for hundreds of years. Without guns, neither would have been possible, or at least neither would have been as easy as they were to pull off. And now, after centuries of guns being used to kill off and keep down people of color in America, those same guns are creating a terrifying epidemic of gun-facilitated violence, from public schools to private homes and public concerts. It's enough to make one think that Isaiah was onto something. Chapter 2, The Sanitized History of America. The United States' expansion and conquest in the late 18th century through the 19th century and into the 20th century is a history written by white men, inked in the blood of Native Americans, and built on the broken and bloody backs of enslaved people brought here from Africa. From 1791, when the Bill of Rights went into effect, until the end of the Civil War, the Second Amendment protected the rights only of white men to own guns. This is simply because until the ratification of the 14th Amendment, states determined who was recognized as a person protected under the Constitution. Initially, in most states, that meant that white men who owned land and paid taxes were the only people considered full citizens under the Constitution. In the South, white men with guns formed slave patrols to control slaves and formed posses to hunt escaped slaves. The book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment. Proof of collusion.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, it's a great day for democracy. We'll get to that in just a second. In our program today, in our second hour, Professor Richard Wolff is going to drop by, the economist, professor of economics, author of numerous books on the topic of economics. And we're going to be talking about Trump driving the dollar down and what happens if the rest of the world, increasingly we're seeing that China is using euros and yuan for exchange. And if the dollar ceases to become the world's default currency, essentially, this could be a disaster for this country, a major long-term disaster. that Joe Biden could inherit. I mean, it would happen very quickly. It would destroy this country in many ways, or at least harm us. We're going to talk to Professor Richard Wolff about that in our second hour. In our third hour, Rick Perlstein is dropping by. He just completed the third book in a series about the rise of conservative power in America. His first one was ReaganLand. His second one was... his first one was about Barry Goldwater and the rise of the conservative movement. The second one was ReaganLand, about Nixon. His third one now, ReaganLand. And we'll be talking to Rick about this scam that is the GOP, or is so-called conservatism. But the news of the day, I mean, when you consider that the guy at the top of the ticket, Donald Trump, has been impeached, criminally indicted by the U.S. House of Representatives. Rick Gates, his assistant campaign manager, convicted. Paul Manafort, his campaign manager, convicted. George Papadopoulos, convicted. Mike Flynn, convicted. Michael Cohen, convicted. Roger Stone, convicted. And this morning, I don't know if you realize this or not, but the post office has its own police department. Yes, it's a crime to tamper with the federal mails. It's also a crime to use the mail for fraudulent purposes. So if you can induce somebody to mail you a check and then you scam them, you've committed a postal crime, a federal crime of it's called, mail fraud. And sure enough, the post office's police department this morning arrested Steve Bannon for running this giant con on Trump supporters. And, and I got to say, I don't increasingly, well, I'll get to that in just a second. Increasingly, my thoughts on, I should just finish this thought. Increasingly, I am convinced that Donald Trump, while, yes, he's running for re-election, on the long shot chance that he can actually win, and he's going to try and scam it, and he's going to try and run the same scam that George W. Bush did in 2000, when it was fairly obvious that Al Gore had won the election, and so, Roger Stone went down to Florida and ran this operation with guys from Tom DeLay's office and Brett Kavanaugh and John Roberts with the so-called Brooks Brothers riot to say stop counting the votes. And they got Fox News to promote the idea that, yeah, Bush has won and Al Gore is trying to steal the election away from him. Donald Trump is going to repeat that same game. Mark Carlin writing about that this morning on BuzzFlash. It's a great piece. So increasingly, I'm thinking that what Donald Trump is actually doing, with probably 4/5 of what he's doing with all the emails that I'm getting, and at least half of them, well, at least a third of them now, and on some days 2/3 of them, are actually not from the Trump campaign. They're from super PACs affiliated with the Trump campaign. His biggest super PAC, Trump's biggest super PAC, has raised like $120 million. Well, he gets to keep that money if he loses. So, I mean, this is a giant con job going on, and it's very similar to the con job that Steve Bannon was running, which is, hey, people who support Donald Trump, send us money and we'll build a private wall. And they collected $25 million and put a good chunk of it in their own pockets, which is why is why Steve Bannon's in jail right now. So, I mean, this shouldn't surprise us that Steve Bannon ran a con, that Rick Manafort ran a con, that Rick Gates ran a con, that George Papadopoulos was running a con, that that Donald Trump ran a con. I mean, he started out. His run for president was a con job. It wasn't he didn't go down the golden elevator or escalator to get himself elected president. He did it to try to get NBC to pay him more than Gwen Stefani. He was enraged when he discovered that he wasn't the most highly paid NBC reality star, that she was making $2 million a year more than he was. I mean, Michael Moore outed this in the very beginning of his last movie. So what did Trump do? He assembled around him a group of fellow grifters, Bannon, Manafort, and a bunch of foreign governments, including Russia, and they managed to squeak him into the White House. And since then, this grift has gone into overdrive. They're now giving away public lands to their campaign donors. They're giving huge no-bid contracts to their campaign donors. They're passing out massive tax breaks to their campaign donors. They're even trying to destroy the post office on behalf of their campaign donors. Are you noticing a theme here? Give us money, we'll give you what you want. Unless you're the people, the average people. I mean, if you're a big corporation or a billionaire, you give Trump money, he gives you what you want. There's a story, Judd Legum over at popular.info today. has a piece, or yesterday actually, I think it was, has a piece out about how this trucking executive gave Trump's super PAC, again, that's money that's going to end up in Trump's pocket. This trucking executive gave Trump's super PAC millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands or whatever it was, some huge contribution. And in exchange for that, apparently, this trucking company got hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts in the post office from Louis DeJoy. Surprise, surprise. Of course, Louis DeJoy just sold for $600 million his own trucking company that contracts with the post office, although he still owns a piece of it. But the biggest and most dangerous part of the Trump con job is what President Barack Obama called out last night. And I thought the Democratic convention last night was absolutely brilliant. It was extraordinary. And President Barack Obama called out this con job that is the Republican Party, the modern Republican Party, the conservative movement, and Donald Trump. He said, I never expected, this is what Obama said, I never expected that my successor, that would be Trump, would embrace my vision or continue my policies. I did hope, for the sake of our country, that Donald Trump might show some interest in taking the job seriously, that he might come to feel the weight of the office and discover some reverence for the democracy that had been placed in his care. But he never did. And the consequences of that failure, President Obama said, are severe. 170,000 Americans dead, millions of jobs gone, while those on the top take more than ever. He said Trump has seen our worst impulses unleashed, our proud reputation around the world badly diminished, and our democratic institutions threatened like never before. I mean, he just laid it right out. And there were some just extraordinary moments from that convention. But he goes on to say the commander-in-chief doesn't use, he's talking about Trump, doesn't use the men and women of our military who are willing to risk everything to protect our nation as political props to deploy against peaceful protesters on our own soil. In other words, he shouldn't, right? I mean, historically, the commander-in-chief doesn't do this. But this one did. Obama said political opponents aren't un-American just because they disagree with you. A free press isn't the enemy, but the way we hold officials accountable. Our ability to work together to solve big problems like a pandemic depends on fidelity to facts and science and logic, not just on making stuff up. None of this should be controversial. These are American principles, said President Barack Obama, the last president of the United States, who was actually a president of the United States. He says, this administration has shown it will tear our democracy down if that's what it takes to win. The last president of the United States saying that the current president of the United States is running a con and is destroying democracy. This has never happened before in the history of this republic. So here we are. From billionaire-funded right-wing think tanks to billionaire-owned Fox News to billionaire-funded efforts to put billionaire-friendly judges on the federal courts to billionaire-funded groups like ALEC writing the very legislation that gets made into law. This whole conservative movement that Ronald Reagan started in 1980 has been one long con. It's a grift. And now the billionaire grifters have kicked this into overdrive. They're sponsoring sleazy and bizarre conspiracy theories, QAnon. They're questioning the viability of democracy. They're attacking our intelligence service and our post office and our FBI and trying to wrap themselves in the flag.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the last refuge of the scoundrel, of a person who hates America. That is what is happening with Trump and his acolytes in the Republican Party right now. And welcome back. Oh, let's pick up some phone calls here. Tyrone in Harlem, New York. Hey, Tyrone, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. I was asking, do you think that we're making a mistake as Democratic politicians are making a mistake by not aggressively dealing with Fox News or going on their show? I saw Dick Durbin on there today, and not battling these falsehoods and even the fear and the anger that is very powerful, and it dictates how people operate. They don't care that Trump's a grifter, that he's a con artist, that he sexually assault women. I'm just afraid that the Mexicans and the blacks are going to come and rape and kill my family. you know
that's they've been selling that crap for centuries, Tyrone, and they're continuing to sell it. And the sad thing is that there's a whole bunch of white people who will buy it. But the good news is that pool of people who will buy that stuff is shrinking every single day. And with people under 40, it's vanishingly small. And that's the good news. The bad news is that people under 40 typically don't vote. Hopefully that's going to change.
That's the problem we have. I just think that we should just deal with Fox News more aggressively as far as when they.
Yeah. Are you saying that Dick Durbin was on Fox this morning? Was that what you were mentioning?
Yeah. I saw him on Fox this morning talking. I was like, "Ooh, that's good," because
it's a tough one because I struggled with this when I was doing a show on RTTV, and I struggle with it when I go on Fox News. To what extent are you basically endorsing something that is, around you that you don't agree with, and yet at the same time, here's an opportunity to talk to millions of people. And so, eventually when RT went totally, in the bag for Trump all the time, we left. And part of it also was our daughter adopted our first grandson, but really it was, they went that direction. And Fox now has gotten so toxic that I'm reluctant to show up on Fox anymore. I used to go on Fox all the time. But it's like, do you really want to, I
remember Elizabeth Warren refused to go on there. And I battled with it to say, well, they can't tell you, Tom, that Trump is doing the best job of any other president. They can say it, but you can combat it. And they can tell you things, this because they're pushing that whole narrative that, like, whole of Portland is on fire. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's no safe place in Portland to go, and everybody is being robbed, killed, and murdered in Portland. You know that's not the truth, but it don't matter.
I absolutely know that.
They're getting away with it. That's why I'm like, somebody got to push back against this, because they're going to continue to go down this road if no one says, wait a minute, I live in Portland.
The Portland police arrested a guy yesterday who was a right-winger who had shot into a crowd. There's another right-winger that they're looking for. This is a former Navy SEAL who apparently planted some pipe bombs. These guys are all Trump humpers. They're all pro-Trump guys. So
that's something we.
Yeah, I think it's sabotage. Tyrone, I got to run, but thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. I'll tell you about what Elizabeth Warren had to say right after this. You can help America return to democracy by telling friends and family how to listen to this and other great progressive programs. Tag You're It. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. Hey, my new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. We're having a coronavirus-safe book tour. I'll be at Powell's virtual bookstore event in conversation with David Corton, Tuesday, August 25th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Go to powells.com and get your tickets for the live stream event. And on Friday, September 4th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, I'll be at a Town Hall Seattle virtual event, and you can get your tickets for that live stream event at townhallseattle.org. There are also links at thomhartmann.com. I'll be taking you from the birth of America through FDR to the Reagan Revolution and today. In the foreword of my book, Ralph Nader says, this is the most important, dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation, end quote. So be sure to go to thomhartmann.com and sign up for one of these two great virtual book signings. Powell's in Portland and Town Hall Seattle. Don't miss it and sign up now. Tag You're It. So along these lines, I guess my question, broadly speaking, and it's a pretty big umbrella. Number one, what did you think about the DNC last night or the convention? Number two, how much longer do you think that Americans are going to continue to buy this grift? I know I've asked this question before, but it seems to never go away. And now we've got, this is what Elizabeth Warren had to say last night at the convention. She said COVID-19 was Trump's biggest test. He failed miserably. She said millions out of work, millions more trapped in cycles of poverty, millions on the brink of losing their homes, millions of restaurants and stores hanging by a thread. This crisis is bad, and it didn't have to be this way. This crisis is on Donald Trump and the Republicans who enable him. On November 3rd, we hold them all accountable. And then she went on, she loves a good plan, right? She went on to say, I love a good plan. And Joe Biden has some really good plans. These plans reflect a central truth. Our economic system has been rigged to give bailouts to billionaires and kick dirt in the face of everyone else. She says, Joe Biden knows that a government run with integrity, competence, and heart will save lives and will save livelihoods. And we can't afford to let Donald Trump continue to endanger the lives and livelihoods of every American. Gabby Giffords gave a speech last night that just, brought a lump to my throat. 9 years ago, she was shot in the head by a right-wing nut, and I was going to call him a nutball, but the guy was trying to assassinate her. He was a right-wing assassin. By the way, 100% of all the political murders committed in the last 2 years in the United States committed by right-wingers. 100%. But Gabby Giffords last night, she said, confronted by paralysis and aphasia, I've responded with grit and determination. I put one foot in front of the other. I found one word and then I found another. My recovery is a daily fight, but fighting makes me stronger. Words once came easily. Today I struggle with speech, but I have not lost my voice. And then she went on to say, America needs all of us to speak out, even when you have to fight to find the words. We're at a crossroads. We can let the shooting continue or we can act. I was amazed. The convention devoted a good solid block, it seemed to me like 10 minutes, it might have been 7 or 8 minutes, whatever it was, to gun control. Then they devoted a solid block to climate change. There were a number of different issues that they just pushed front and center. And of course, throughout the convention, the issues of racial and gender justice and all that sort of thing have been, front and center. I'm just very encouraged by this whole thing. Now, on the other hand, the Postal Service, Louis DeJoy is negotiating with J.P. Morgan Chase, Jamie Dimon's company, to put ATMs in post offices across the country and give them an exclusive monopoly on postal banking. This is a way of preventing Bernie Sanders' idea of post offices serving as banks for the millions, tens of millions of Americans who literally don't have enough money to be able to afford the fees of a regular bank. I mean, we used to have postal banking in America. They have postal banking in other countries. Well, DeJoy wants to prevent that by bringing in J.P. Morgan Chase. This is disgusting. This is part of that con that I was talking about that Reagan started. It's just absolutely incredible. Our last caller, Tyrone, just a few minutes ago, mentioned Portland. I got to tell you what's going on in Portland. Two things. Number one, yesterday, Portland police arrested a 27-year-old. He was one of the pro-police protesters. There was a pro-police and an anti-police, basically a defund the police or restrain the police demonstration here in Portland. And somebody drove by in a car and shot at the anti-fascist protesters. And now they know who it was. It was a guy named, or they believe they do. It's alleged. His name is Skylar Jernigan. And he was booked on 2 counts of unlawful use of a weapon, menacing, recklessly endangering another person with a weapon, and discharging a firearm in the city. These are felonies. Meanwhile, here in Portland, yesterday, or maybe it was the day before, people were lining up long lines at banks, credit unions, and savings and loan institutions all over the state. Why? Because the Oregon legislature authorized one-time $500 per person gifts. We got $35 million from the federal government for COVID relief, and the legislature said, let's give this away to 70,000 Oregonians. It was first come, first serve, $500. All you had to do was show up, prove who you are, and show some evidence that you deserve this money, and boom. And the lines were, the mood was upbeat, outside on point. This is one of our credit unions on Wednesday afternoon. Nearly everyone waiting for their $500 was wearing masks, and many had their children with them. Some were enjoying popsicles in temperatures that were well into the 80s. All over Oregon. I'm surprised this didn't get national publicity. I mean, other states could be doing this. But, you know, there is real suffering out there. And Rand Paul yesterday came out and said the exact opposite. He said, if you give people money and you make it less painful to be in a recession, we'll be in the recession longer. So all these governors, Democrat and Republican, will not have an incentive to open the economy if they soften the amount of suffering that they have created. Rand Paul wants more suffering. Are you suffering enough? What do you think about Rand Paul? Is he right that suffering, causing more suffering for Americans is the answer to this?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And if suffering is the thing that causes people to act appropriately, why aren't we causing the billionaires and multimillionaires to suffer? Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Revolutionary Love by Michael Lerner, a political manifesto to heal and transform the world. This is from the introduction. We Earthlings need to build a fundamental change of consciousness into ourselves and in every part of our national and global society in order to achieve the economic and political changes necessary to prevent the destruction of the life support system of Earth, in order to end global and domestic poverty and wealth inequality, to defeat racism, sexism, homophobia, and other forms of xenophobia, to protect human rights, to achieve social, economic, and environmental justice, and to achieve lasting global peace. This new consciousness is possible and can emerge through embracing revolutionary love, the struggle for a caring society, and a new bottom line in all our economic, political, legal, educational, and cultural institutions. This manifesto is written to show you how this can happen and how you can help make it possible. Liberal and progressive movements need to move beyond a focus on economic entitlements and political rights to embrace a new discourse of love, kindness, generosity, and awe. These are not some new agey smile and be nice formula or let's get into self-transformation before we change society kind of thinking. I'm calling for both our American and global societies to embrace a new bottom line so that every economic, political, societal, and cultural institution is considered efficient, rational, and or productive, not according to the old bottom line of how much these institutions maximize money, power, or ego, but rather how much they maximize love and generosity, kindness and forgiveness, ethical and environmentally sustainable behavior, social and economic justice. This new bottom line seeks to enhance our capacity to transcend a narrow utilitarian or instrumental way of viewing human beings and nature, so that we respond to other people as embodiments of the sacred, instead of thinking of them primarily in terms of how much they can serve our interests. And also so that we can respond to nature not solely as a resource for human needs, but rather through awe, wonder, and radical amazement at the beauty and grandeur of this universe. I call this new consciousness revolutionary love, and its goal is to create the caring society, caring for each other and caring for the earth. The vehicle to create this new consciousness we will call the Love and Justice Movement, and eventually the Love and Justice Party. The revolutionary possibility of love is the kind of love that breaks through those distortions of consciousness that make it difficult to implement a national environmental policy or to end the many forms of oppression that permeate our world. To really embrace revolutionary love requires us to develop a strategy way beyond anything currently being given serious attention in the media, the political parties, and even many of the social change movements. And it requires us to move beyond what seems realistic in terms of the contemporary frame of discourse. Yet there is no alternative if we're to solve the environmental crisis and prevent our society in the coming decades from moving further and further into reactionary nationalism and repression of our own humanity. We need a global mobilization of billions of people to solve the problem, and this manifesto outlines the first steps to making possible such a mobilization. To understand the urgency, let's consider our current environmental crisis. In 1992, thousands of scientists issued a collective statement warning of the impending dangers to the life support system of planet Earth. 25 years later, in December 2017, 15,364 scientists from 184 countries signed a new statement that reads, in part, "Since 1992, with the exception of stabilizing the stratospheric ozone layer, humanity has failed to make sufficient progress in generally solving these unforeseen environmental changes, and alarmingly, most of them are getting far worse. Especially troubling is the current trajectory of potentially catastrophic climate change due to rising greenhouse gases from burning fossil fuels and agricultural production, particularly from farming ruminants for meat consumption. Moreover, we have unleashed a mass extinction event, the sixth in roughly 540 million years, wherein many current life forms could be annihilated or at least committed to extinction by the end of this century. Humanity is now being given a second notice. We are jeopardizing our future by not reining in our intense but geologically and demographically uneven material consumption, and by not perceiving continued rapid population growth as a planetary driver behind many ecological and even societal threats. By failing to adequately limit population growth, reassess the role of an economy rooted in growth, reduce greenhouse gases, incentivize renewable energy, protect habitat, restore ecosystems, curb pollution, halt defaunation, and constrain invasive alien species, humanity is not taking the urgent steps needed to safeguard our imperiled biosphere." End of quote from the scientists. And in October, well, it continues. The book is Revolutionary Love by Rabbi Michael Lerner.
Thank you so much.
Nation. But my professional focus has always been on consciousness and energy. Healing Power of Neurofeedback by Steve Larson. Coming up on the Science Revolution, Noah Greenwald from the Center for Biological Diversity is here on Trump's latest actions to weaken the Endangered Species Act. You know, as we destroy the wild, we destroy ourselves. Dr. Justin A. Frank, MD, drops by and says it is terrifying to have a president who is psychotic, and explains why Trump hates anyone who is loved. Former Assistant Secretary for Health under Obama, Dr. Howard Koh, tells us how Biden will handle this pandemic we're in. And lastly, in Geeky Science, we find out how our bones are made of stars. The Science Revolution, wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. There's a lot of other stuff in the news. I wanted to share a few things with you, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. One of the things that I found absolutely fascinating this morning, I was just, poking around the internet and found this story that was published. Matthew Chapman wrote it. It's over at rawstory.com. The headline is, "Dems can use this constitutional trick to stop Trump's judges from dismantling Biden's agenda." And you go, oh, really? How do you do that? After all, Trump put basically a third of all the federal judges on the federal judiciary, Trump appointed. Because, for most of Obama's presidency, Mitch McConnell refused to let his judicial nominees, including Merrick Garland for Supreme Court, go through, which was a crime, in my opinion. But, here we are. So what do? Well, I wrote about this in my book. In fact, this is why I wrote this book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. The newest one that's out literally this week is The Hidden History of Monopoly, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. Ralph Nader wrote a brilliant foreword for it. And, that's a fascinating take, and I've been doing a lot of media on that. But the Supreme Court book, the last chapter in it, kind of builds up to this. The last chapter in the book is about how John Roberts, when he was working for Ronald Reagan in the Reagan Justice Department in the 1980s, he had been asked by Reagan's people to figure out a way to have the federal government ignore the two Supreme Court rulings. How can we get around these two Supreme Court rulings? One was Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. It's illegal to have segregated schools. And the second was Roe v. Wade, 1973. It's illegal to ban abortion. States can no longer block women from having abortions. And, Reagan's people asked this young lawyer, John Roberts, how do you get around this? I mean, these are Supreme Court decisions. And Roberts wrote this a nearly 30-page memo, which I found, and I don't think anybody had ever even known that this memo existed. I mean, it took me the better part of a year to find this thing and kind of ferret out and dig it out of the bowels of the Justice Department. And in this memo, John Roberts says, well, Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution says, and it does say, that Congress can create exceptions to what the Supreme Court can rule on. In other words, Congress can pass a law, and in that law, they can say the Supreme Court may not rule on this. So if Congress wants to ban money in politics, all they have to do is pass a law banning money in politics and then say this law may not be reviewed by the Supreme Court. It's right there in the Constitution. Now, Roberts recommended that to Reagan, although he said be very careful, because if you use this, then the Democrats will use this, and you're going to weaken the Supreme Court by doing this. So be very careful. This is in emergency break glass. And Reagan ultimately decided not to do that. No president has ever done, well, actually, two presidents have done this. Andrew Jackson did this, ignored the Supreme Court in two cases, for the Second National Bank of America and the Trail of Tears. And Abraham Lincoln ignored the Dred Scott case and said, well, that's a terrible thing for Mr. Scott, but, we're going to go ahead and pretend that case was not ruled on that way by the Supreme Court. But it wasn't Congress in either case overruling the Supreme Court. What John Roberts was suggesting is that Congress can overrule the Supreme Court. And I lay it all out in The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. And so now this legal scholar, this guy Christopher Sprigman, writing for the New Republic, says, Article 3 of the Constitution gives Congress substantial power to strip federal courts' jurisdiction, a power that can be employed to rein in politicized courts and even to override judicial decisions. And he's right. And John Roberts is right. It's just never been done in any kind of consequential way. And I think it should be done. I really think it should be done. And because we need to reverse Buckley versus Vallejo and First National Bank versus Bellotti, the 76 and 78, 1976, 1978 decisions that said that when billionaires or big corporations want to own a politician or even an entire political party, that's not corruption, that's free speech. Those decisions need to be reversed. That is the cancer at the core of all the problems we are facing, including the problem of Donald Trump. If it wasn't for billionaire money in politics, Trump would not be in office. And, we did a lot about this during the Jerry Ford administration, after the Nixon bribery scandals, and in the Jimmy Carter administration. I mean, we passed a bunch of laws to get money out of politics. And then along came the Supreme Court and blew them up. So, I'm hopeful, now that you've got actual, lawyers, actual law professors and legal scholars talking about this seriously and taking this seriously, I think that, there's some real potential for the future of this country. Anyhow, let's pick up your phone calls here and see what you think of all this. Samuel in Rose City, Michigan. Hey, Samuel, what's up?
Well, Tom, thanks for taking my call. I'm kind of worried about coronavirus. I heard the Chinese found coronavirus in packaged meat from the United States.
They did.
And nobody's talking about it.
Well, that's because nobody's really sure what's going on, Samuel. There were, I talked about this on the air last week. There were two cases, and one was China, and the other was either South Korea or Taiwan. It was another Southeast Asian country. And one involved frozen, these were both frozen meats. One was frozen fish, and the other was frozen chicken. And in both cases, they tested positive for coronavirus on the surface of the food product. Now, that seems kind of alarming. But the tests, the coronavirus tests, are not looking for an intact, viable, viruses aren't alive to begin with, but, infectious, shall we say, kind of living virus. They're not looking for that. What they're looking for are proteins, components of the virus, proteins that are unique to that virus, principally the ones that make up the spikes on the outside of the virus that let it infect cells. And so if the virus, if somebody had the virus and they handled this fish and this meat, and then it got frozen, and the viruses were destroyed by time or by the freezing process or whatever it may be, there would still be those particles of protein on that meat or fish, on that chicken or fish, that could be detected by the test. So nobody knows yet if this was actually viable virus or not. So that's a big unknown, number one. And number two, we haven't seen this replicated over and over again. And number three, there have been no reliable cases, at least reported in the United States, of anybody getting coronavirus from their food. So, this is something to be concerned about. But it's not something to be flipped out about, at least yet. Samuel, thanks for the call. Dennis in Crystal River, Florida. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind?
Yeah, thanks for taking my call, Tom. Listen, I've called my congressman every day, twice a day for 2 weeks now, and I asked him about the stimulus bill for multi-employment pension funds, because we're going to be out of our pension fund very shortly, and nobody is talking about it. We're talking about 400,000 members that are going to lose their pension. I was wondering maybe you could say something about it.
This is the Mid-States Fund you're talking about?
It's a Central States Fund.
Central States? Central States
yes.
Fund, yeah. Yeah, this is, every week Congressman Pocan gets a phone call about this when he's on our show. I think it's something that the Democrats are very, very concerned about and trying to do something about, but the Republicans don't give a damn. I mean, this is a pension fund for union workers, and Republicans don't even believe workers should have the right to unionize, much less have, well-funded union pensions. So you've got the entire Republican Party and the entire Trump administration fighting this tooth and nail, trying to prevent any government money from helping or bailing out this pension fund. But keep at it, Dennis. I mean, that's all we can do is we just have to keep at it and keep, demanding some sort of response. Thanks a lot for the call, Dennis. John in Gary, Indiana. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, Tom. What is wrong with Rand Paul? Talking about people having to suffer.
Right.
In order, if they don't suffer, then they won't do anything. What is wrong with him?
There are two things.
Crazy.
Yeah, I agree with you, John. There's two things going on. Number one, the conservative worldview, and this goes back 200 years. This goes back to Edmund Burke. The conservative worldview actually goes back 400 years to Thomas Hobbes in 1634. The conservative worldview is grounded in the idea that people are essentially evil, and therefore you have to have, to quote Hobbes, the iron fist of church or state to restrain their evil impulses. So when people don't behave the way you want, you must make them suffer. That's Rand Paul's worldview. It's probably how he was raised. And then the second thing is, he has bought into this libertarian theology that was promoted when the Libertarian Party was invented in the 1950s and 60s by a real estate lobby, that government is a bad thing. Government regulating real estate, government regulating toxic industries, that's a terrible thing, and therefore we have to destroy government. And, and that's Rand Paul in a nutshell. Those two ideologies combined in one person create this real sick worldview.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And it's real unfortunate, but John, you nailed it. And I think there's probably a lot of Americans who are scratching their heads going, what's with these Republicans? Because Rand Paul's not alone in believing this. And welcome back. Jenny in Lebanon, Oregon. Hey, Jenny, what's on your mind today?
I watched the convention. I watched it every night, and I would have been thrilled about the emphasis on global warming, but unfortunately, earlier during the week, the plank for getting rid of the fossil fuel subsidies was dropped from the platform.
I know. There were a number of things that were dropped from the platform. The platform is, it's an aspirational statement. There are some holes in this platform this year. It doesn't matter, Jenny. There has never been an administration in the history, at least in my lifetime, where they used the platform as a blueprint for anything. The platform is basically, their tool for getting elected. So, I would just let go of that. Don't worry about it. It's, the work begins the day that Joe Biden is sworn in as president. That's when the work begins. And we have to convince him that, we need a Green New Deal. Bill in St. Helens, Oregon. Hey, Bill, what's up?
So, Tom, this is supposedly, and I do say supposedly, a representative democracy. And, one of the things missing, I'm seeing decision after decision after decision being made by Trump appointees and others. And yet, what I'm never seeing is the rationale. And I'm going to use LaJoy as the perfect example. He gets appointed in May of 2020, and he immediately starts to dismantle the post office. Based on what, Tom? Where are the studies? Where are the recommendations?
Oh, no, he's providing a rationale, Bill. He's providing a rationale. The largest excuse that they're using is that the post office is like $100 billion in the hole right now. And they're saying, therefore, we need to cut waste and mismanagement, and we need to tighten up operations, and so we need to do austerity. And that's the rubric under which all his activities have happened, Bill.
Tom, I actually worked for 3 years maintaining those machines and 1 year as a postal carrier. And I tell you what, I can't remember a single instance in our processing center where anybody suggested we just had too much equipment. If anything, we were under a little bit, and when we were under, guess what we had to do? Ramp up overtime. So more machines typically meant less overtime. That's not my point. We're still back to my point. Where is his rationale? Where are the metrics? Where are the factual research? You don't come into office. What's the first rule of management? You don't walk into a new job and just start arbitrarily making changes, which is exactly what LaJoy is doing, and a lot of other Trump appointees have been doing. I want to see the factual basis. How is removing machines saving the post office money? I can tell you for a fact it's
Bill,
not.
DeJoy is a Republican. Republicans don't believe in facts.
But we do. And how do we know how we're being
but we don't run the federal government right now. The Republicans do.
So how do we know how we're being represented if nobody's telling us the basis of the basis of their decision?
Well, we don't, and that's why people like President Obama last night are saying our democracy is being dismantled.
I can only hope that on Monday, one or more of my representatives goes to LaJoy and says, I want to see the research, I want to see the published studies, I want to see the hard justification. And Mr. LaJoy, if it's anything less than your opinion, you're fired.
I think he should be put in jail. It's a federal felony to slow down the mail. You've got, one of the stories that's catching people's attention is this small farming family, chicken farmers in Maine, who get chicks through the mail. And they, every couple months they get this delivery of chicks, and they have for years and years. And their chicks arrived yesterday, and they were all dead because they got delayed in the mail because the sorting equipment has been destroyed. It's wild. We'll continue in just a moment. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. The hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment tells how the Second Amendment was written to protect Georgia's slave patrols. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. And welcome back. Sean in Stamford, Connecticut. Hey, Sean, what's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Tom. How's it going? Well, I heard the party thing about Rand Paul, and I called the cause of that because there were some articles I had read recently about New York and how people are fleeing the city because of COVID and all that's going on behind it. And my contention is what Rand Paul is getting at is if cities like New York are left to suffer, maybe they'll rebuild. But the problem is New York is a reflection of a mirror globally, and what happens in New York happens elsewhere or will happen elsewhere.
So your point, Sean, I'm missing.
Oh, I'm sorry. My point is that what Rand Paul is saying is very short-sighted, and you have to think that we're not just in this issue by ourselves.
It goes beyond that, Sean. Rand Paul made in that comment. He said this crisis was caused by government. It was government that shut down the economy. See, Rand Paul sees government as the source of all evil. No, that's literally what he said. And in fact,
I'm fine with you. I know, but what he's saying is short-sighted and foolish.
Yeah, no, he said, this recession is created by the government shut down the economy. That's a verbatim quote from Rand Paul's interview with Axios. And in his, see, here's the thing, Sean. The only force in the world that has the power to stop, a giant coal company that wants to poison the river is government. The only force in the world that has the power to stop a bank that wants to rip off its customers is government. The only power, literally the only power in the world that has the ability to stop, fill in the blanks, right? An oil company from polluting or a fracking company from polluting people's well water is government. And so the people who want to pollute your well water, the people who want to poison the water and air, the people who want to make money ripping people off, the banksters, all these people do not want government stopping them from making money while they're robbing us and killing us. And so their frontmen, their shills, their useful idiots like Rand Paul declare themselves to be libertarians and say government is the cause of all problems. Now, obviously, there are states that didn't shut down, and yet they didn't have a massive explosion of coronavirus. They just had a significant explosion not because the government, failed to shut down the state, but because the people read the damn news and said, wait a minute, I'm not going into that mess. And so the real thing that has killed the economy is not government. It is the virus. And, we just need to get to that. We need to figure that out. Rand Paul obviously doesn't understand that. Howard in Motti, Alabama. Hey, Howard, what's up?
Thank you, Tom. Does the Senate follow parliamentary rules? And if so, could the Democrats have not showed up to vote on McConnell's judges? And would that have denied them the vote?
The Senate does not follow Robert's Rules of Order. The Senate follows their own rules, which are rewritten every 2 years when the new Senate and when the new Congress is sworn in. And those rules are voted on. In fact, that's the first vote that the Senate takes, and the House of Representatives as well. They define their own rules. And I'm pretty sure if you're talking about denying the Republicans a quorum, I'm pretty sure that a quorum is defined as a majority of senators.
Oh, I see. Okay, I was wondering about that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot for the call. Timothy in Harpersville, New York. Hey, Timothy, what's up?
Yeah, I'm very upset that Congress in office is still getting paid for doing nothing. And it's not the Democrats, it's not the Republicans, it's both. And I am totally upset that, they can't pass another.
Timothy, the Democrats back in May passed a $3 billion piece of legislation called the HEROES Act that would have fully funded our police and fire departments, would have fully funded our post office. It was $25 billion in funding for the post office that would have extended the $600 a week that unemployed people were getting all the way into January so that the next Congress can decide what to do next.
that would have provided substantial financial relief for small businesses. They excluded billion-dollar businesses, which is what Trump, bailed out earlier. That would have extended that care to small businesses. And for 3 months now, Mitch McConnell and the Republicans in the U.S. Senate have refused to even discuss it. They won't even allow a committee to hold a hearing on the HEROES Act. This is absolutely Republican obstruction. This is not a case of both sides are doing it. This is Republicans are doing it. Republicans have fought every effort. In the House, they've been outvoted by the Democrats. In the Senate, they can outvote the Democrats, and they have. The Republicans have been fighting every effort to give working people relief, to give small businesses relief, to do anything, and frankly, to order the government to start producing personal protective equipment, PPE, which is now a crisis. I don't know if you caught NPR yesterday afternoon doing a whole show on how, all across Texas, hospitals don't have PPE right now. Nurses and doctors are dying. Over 1,000 nurses and doctors have died of COVID so far because of this administration and the Republicans' absolute unwillingness to provide people with the resources that they need. This is a crime in progress that we're watching, and it's a crime being perpetrated by Donald Trump and the Republican Party. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrained me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had masters slaves, feudalism had lords serfs, and monarchy had king subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff. The antitrust law to deal with one very narrow type of harm. The Curse of Bigness by Tim Wu.
is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of Democracy at Work, author of numerous books. His most recent, Understanding Socialism, democracyatwork.info, and Wolff with 2Fs.com are his websites. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff with 2Fs. And Professor Wolff, welcome back. I shared with you this Bloomberg article about China's banking watchdog warning the Fed basically about what's up. And the Fed has created $7 trillion out of thin air. There was a piece yesterday or the day before in the Financial Times wondering out loud what will happen to America if our dollar dominance around the world, if the dollar ceases to be the world's reserve currency. How much inflation could that cause in this country? What's going on here? What is up with all this?
Well, I think you see a number of signs. First, I'm a little amused, as I know readers around the world are, to have the Chinese weighing in now that they are a monster economy really contending with the United States for dominance. They're going to comment on our central bank's behavior. Their comment is shared by others. It's not that the comment is out of order. It's just another sign that the United States' footprint in the world economy is shrinking and that of China is growing. And there are hundreds of those signs, but this is another one. The concern of the Chinese central bank and of the Chinese finance ministry is shared by the rest of the world. The United States has both the benefits, and they're enormous, and some of the burdens of being the world's currency. Right now, the Federal Reserve is so desperate about the conditions of the American capitalist system that, as you noted, they have been pumping up the money supply by the trillions. They already did that once before in the 2008 crash, so this is a huge extra on top of an already swollen money supply. And the great anxiety when you print money like this is that it will start to chase goods and services, and then you get that inflation, and nobody knows quite how bad that might be or how soon it'll come or what its damages might be. You can already see it because a good bit of that money has all flown into the stock market, where you have an inflation, where you have seen spectacular doubling or tripling of the prices of all kinds of stocks from their low in March to where they are right now. So you can see the money flowing in. You can see how the bidding up of prices is going. And so you can only sit and shiver and wonder to yourself, what happens if and when that money, facing the possibility of a burst stock market bubble, might start looking for other things to be spending on, and then the price of everything else will go crazy, and the difficulties we have now in our economy will be compounded.
So what does the average American do about this? I subscribe to this newsletter, the Aiden Forecast. We've had Pamela and Marianne Aiden, who publish it on this show before. It's basically for retail investors. And a couple of weeks ago, they came out with a newsletter saying that, it looks like the Trump administration is trying to drive down the value of the dollar. And the Chinese are involved in all this, basically. So move your money out of dollars and buy euros right now. The stock market's a crazy place to put your money. The bond market has fallen apart, but you can buy, ETFs for euros or Australian dollars or Canadian dollars, because, Trump has set the dollar up for a fall, basically. Is that, how do we get ready for something like that? I remember the really, really high inflation rates in the 1970s. I bought a house once. I think it was a 13% mortgage on this house that Louise and I bought. Are we going back to that? How do people respond to this? How do we deal with it?
Well, I wish I could give you the kind of magic answer here, do this, that I know is in your mind and the minds of millions of other people. But I cannot. At least I can't do it honestly. There is no riskless asset. There never was. Even if you hold cash, if we have an inflation, the cash becomes less and less valuable as the prices of everything go up. So even something as simple as that. But I'm afraid this applies to the rest of the world's currencies also. They are in a different situation. They're not pumping up the money supply the way the United States is, but they're also in a different situation. The only safety that I can ever see in the instability of our capitalist system is the old rule of not putting all your eggs in one basket. Make very sure that if you have any assets, that you have the ability to move around. Make sure some of them are in the United States. Make sure some of them are out. Make sure some of them are denominated in dollars. Make sure some of them are denominated in euros or Japanese yen or whatever else you have a belief in. Don't put it all in stocks. Don't put it all in bonds. Don't put it all in big companies. Don't put it all in medium or small. In other words, try to spread it out so that you do not get wiped out if one or another of these sectors is undone. And let me assure you that between the pandemic and the crash of capitalism around the world and the consolidation of Europe, which is not being reported but should be because they're getting their act together and they are a bigger economy taken together than the U.S. is, and the disputes between the United States and China, you have a set of possible variables that disrupt everything that make any commitment to one asset or one category of assets the most unwise way to invest your money.
Yeah. I wrote an op-ed a couple of weeks ago pointing out that Jerome Powell is not an economist. He's a bankster. In fact, he was a managing director at the Carlyle Group.
Right.
And that, he's printed $7 trillion in money and used a good chunk of it to buy corporate bonds and stocks, thus supporting the stock market. And speculating about, what happens if Trump gets his favorite meal, which is revenge, the day after Joe Biden is declared the winner of the election, whatever day that may be. Trump orders Powell to stop supporting the stock market. And, what might happen if Powell was to say, okay, that's it. We're not only going to stop buying stocks and bonds, we're going to sell the $6 or $7 trillion worth that we're holding right now, or whatever the amount is, a couple $1 trillion worth we're holding right now.
Well, let me tell you two things. One, I doubt Mr. Powell would such a thing, given who he is and how he has spent his life. He has more loyalty to the likes of Carlyle Group than to Mr. Trump, and that was always true, and that's true now, too. But I would actually point you in another direction. This is a stock market bubble. This is a pricing of stocks based on a flood of money. That means that everyone who's involved, these are the knowledgeable speculators, they know, too, that this kind of a bubble always ends badly, and usually in the same way. The bubble bursts. That's why we even have the language available to say what I just said. Therefore, the trick is not just to come in and buy and then resell at a higher price. Equally important is to get out before that burst happens. So what you're getting, and you're already seeing it now, are more and more anxious investors. Yes, they're in there. Yes, they're continuing to buy and resell at a higher price. But it wouldn't take much of a startling new event to make an awful lot of people in the market decide this is the moment to play it safe, sell what you have. If you're wrong, you can go back in next week. And, of course, as always with the instability of capitalism, that very idea of what may happen if people act on it will bring about their worst fear.
Yeah, there you go. Professor Richard Wolff, his most recent book, Understanding Socialism, Democracy at Work.info and rdwolff.com. Thank you, Dr. Wolff. Thanks so much for dropping by.
My pleasure. Thank you, Tom.
Great talking with you. I always learn something from Richard Wolff. He's just brilliant. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Oh, the RNC convention slate is out. I got to tell you about that. Stick around. We'll be back with that in 4 minutes. And welcome back. Leo in Portland. Hey, Leo, what's on your mind today?
Tom, I love that you called Trump out for what it is as a con man reality show star. As a reality show star, people are surprised, when he acts obnoxious and ridiculous, and I don't understand it. That's the way reality show stars act. That's what gets the ratings. Right. Nobody watches it to see somebody act like a normal, everyday person. And
reality shows are all about creating train wrecks. I mean,
right.
You're absolutely right.
I'd love to go on record now, and on the con man side of it, I'd like to make the call now that Trump won't ever get prosecuted. I think that he's already laid all the groundwork for him to pull an Imelda Marcos and disappear in the night with all the money that he's scammed, and he's going to wind up in Russia and live in Trump Towers, Russia, or Trump Towers, Moscow, and with all the money that him and his family have stolen.
Yeah. It's entirely possible. His wife and son both have Slovenian citizenship, in addition to U.S. citizenship. And although I don't think Trump has it, he probably wouldn't have a hard time getting it if they all want to move to Slovenia. I don't know if Russia recognizes Slovenian citizenship as something that gets you a visa, but probably they would break all the rules for Donald Trump. There's no doubt in my mind, Leo, that, we now know that Donald Trump was negotiating Trump Tower Moscow right up to the day of the election. I mean, he was hot and heavy on this. He wanted Trump Tower Moscow, and they were basically saying, yeah, just keep, stringing him along and helping him out. And, therefore he's president.
For self-exile, like I said, like a Imelda Marcos scam of stealing all the money and disappearing to fleeing to another country. And I think he's been laying the groundwork with Putin and, all the money scams for so long that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right, Leo. It's going to be a real interesting time. Leo, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Lolo in the Bronx, New York. Hey, Lolo, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I have a question. The mail-in versus walk-in. Tom,
ballots?
Yes, right. Walk-in and mail-in versus walk-in. Question: does the electronic voting machines make it possible to hack again, like in 2016, to give the 2020 win to Trump and the GOP?
Yes, it's there's going to be a lot of effort being put forward to prevent that, but most states are still using electronic voting machines, which are vulnerable to being hacked. Every year in Las Vegas, we see 11-year-olds hacking voting machines recreationally. And then you've got the tabulator machines. That's what was flipped in Alabama in the 2002 election to deny Governor Don Siegelman his reelection and put Bob Riley, the Republican, in office instead. And then when Siegelman started yelling about it, they threw him in prison for 7 years. But yes, it's a problem, Lolo, and it's a problem that we need to address as quickly as possible. At least with a mail-in ballot, you know that there is a paper trail, and that's a good thing, particularly in those states that rely heavily on electronic voting machines. Lolo, thank you for the call. It's a great question. We'll be back 20 minutes before the hour here on after the hour, here on the Thom Hartmann Program, occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. Hey, my new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. We're having a coronavirus-safe book tour. I'll be at Powell's virtual bookstore event in conversation with David Corton, Tuesday, August 25th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Go to powells.com and get your tickets for the live stream event. And on Friday, September 4th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, I'll be at a Town Hall Seattle virtual event, and you can get your tickets for that live stream event at townhallseattle.org. There are also links at thomhartmann.com. I'll be taking you from the birth of America through FDR to the Reagan Revolution and today. In the foreword of my book, Ralph Nader says, "This is the most important, dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. So be sure to go to thomhartmann.com and sign up for one of these 2 great virtual book signings. Powell's in Portland and Town Hall, Seattle. Don't miss it and sign up now. Tag you're it. So, following on my theme from the first hour about this is a con job, these guys are grifters. Steve Bannon just got busted for this. And by the way, he was not alone in this effort. This is, I didn't know this. I just saw Edward Isaac Dovere is tweeting this. Chris Kobach is the general counsel for the Build the Wall PAC that Steve Bannon was just arrested for being involved with as chairman. The advisory board includes Eric Prince, former Colorado Congressman Tom Tancredo, Sheriff Dave Clark, and former pitcher Curt Schilling. So apparently these are the grifters, the scam artists who are involved in this thing. So speaking of grifters and scam artists, now I'm not sure that the RNC has issued an official lineup or rundown or roster of people who will be speaking at the Republican Party next week. But we do know the people who have come out and said, I've been invited to speak. I'm going to be one of the speakers. And this is the lineup. Kid Rock, a washed up rocker. Ted Nugent, another washed up, rocker. Who wants to hear from these guys, really? Scott Baio, I don't even know who he is. Nick Sandmann, he's that MAGA hat kid who stood in front of the Native American, elder. The demon sperm doctor, yes, this doctor, she was endorsing hydroxychloroquine and endorsing Trump and all this kind of stuff, and it turns out that she's got at least one patient who says whose family says that she killed him, etc. And she says that demon sperm is causing women's problems. And the My Pillow guy, he's going to speak at the Republican convention. He's now hustling a new extract from some kind of plant, oleander plant, that he says might cure COVID. Turns out that the extract from oleander is deadly poison. Oh, that's wonderful. That's just exactly what we need, right? Lots and lots of that stuff. The Goya Beans CEO. Oh, yeah, let's get a Hispanic on here to sell some beans. I mean, apparently that's all he's doing. It's like, really? That couple in St. Louis, these 2 racist lawyers who went out in front of their mansion when the Black Lives Matter protesters marched down their street. They were on their way to some CEO or some political figure, I forget who. But in any case, they walked by this mansion and they came out and literally pointed guns at peaceful, unarmed protesters. John Voight, washed up actor, Diamond and Silk, James Woods, another actor whose time has long passed, and the Blacks for Trump guy. Seriously. This is what's going on. And meanwhile, Rand Paul is saying if you give people money and you make it less painful to be in a recession, we can stay in a recession longer. So all these governors, Democrat and Republican, will not have an incentive to open the economy if you soften the amount of suffering that they have created. And this seems to be why Mitch McConnell, and by the way, big headline now today also, the Russian company that is building the aluminum plant in Kentucky that Mitch McConnell is bragging about to Kentuckians, saying, hey, look at this, I got you some jobs. Turns out that company is, quote, an agent of the Kremlin. Oh, how entertaining. This quote keeps coming out every couple, it seems like every 3 months or so it gets recycled, but it's a brilliant one. I've quoted it before. Somebody, AZ Atheist, reposted it on Democratic Underground the other day. But it's from Thomas Paine, and it's from his book, Common Sense, or his pamphlet, Common Sense. And he was talking about, basically the people that the British had installed as governors and rulers of the American colonies. but yeah, I think it's true of Donald Trump, if nothing or nobody else. He said, men who look upon themselves born to reign and others to obey soon grow insolent. Selected from the rest of mankind, their minds are early poisoned by importance. And the world they act in differs so materially from the world at large that they have but little opportunity of knowing its true interests. And when they succeed to the government, they frequently are the most ignorant and unfit of any throughout the dominions. Tell me that is not Donald Trump. Meanwhile, police were called to a Planned Parenthood, the Planned Parenthood of Central and Western New York, West Seneca Health. There was a man who demanded to speak to his partner who was believed to be being treated at the health center. He became a threat to the patient and staff. He was asked to leave. After leaving, he came back and he tried to get in. They wouldn't let him in. He was kicking the door. They called 911, and a police officer came out and saw that there was a Black Lives Matter sign in the window of the Planned Parenthood office and started berating the staff of Planned Parenthood for supporting Black Lives Matter, and then refused to deal with this guy who was threatening his wife or spouse or partner or whatever she was who was in the clinic. This is where we're at. This is what Trump has brought us to in 2020.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
People yelling obscenity at total strangers, people acting in psychopathic ways. It's bizarre, but they're imitating Trump.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Fred Kaplan's new book, The Bomb: Presidents, Generals, and the Secret History of Nuclear War. This is from the introduction. For 30 years after the Cold War ended, almost no one thought, much less worried, about nuclear war. Now, almost everyone is fearful. But the fear takes the form of a vaguely paralyzed anxiety. Because of the long reprieve from the bomb's shadow, few people know how to grasp its dimensions. They've forgotten, if they ever knew. The holiday from history began on August 8th, 2017, when President Donald Trump, barely 6 months in office, told reporters at his golf resort in Bedminster, New Jersey, that if the North Koreans kept threatening the United States with harsh rhetoric and missile tests, quote, they would be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen, end quote. Even those who didn't remember President Harry Truman's similar description 72 years earlier of the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, Truman said, a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. It was clear that in language more bellicose than any president since the end of World War II, Trump was talking about launching nuclear weapons at North Korea. Not if its leader, Kim Jong-un, first attacked the United States, but merely if he developed the ability to do so. Then, 6 months later, Trump signed and released his administration's Nuclear Posture Review, a 74-page document that called for building new types of nuclear weapons and integrating them with the military's conventional war plans. In short, for treating nuclear weapons as normal. The red lights flashed. The alarm bells rang furiously. Yet here is what few recognized. None of these notions were new. The president himself seemed a departure from the norm. His character, erratic, eruptive, thin-skinned, willfully uninformed, a combustive mix for a world leader with his finger on the button. But the button and everything around it were the same. In those decades when most of us chose to forget the bomb, as global tensions calmed and fallout shelters crumbled and we turned our gaze to other problems and pleasures, the nuclear war machine continued to rumble forth in the beyond top-secret chambers of the Pentagon, the Strategic Command Headquarters in Omaha, the weapons labs in various parts of the country, and the think tanks whose denizens never stopped thinking about the unthinkable. They all kept at their singular task, wrestling with the dilemmas posed by the bomb's existence. How to deter nuclear war? How to fight a nuclear war if it cannot be deterred? How to win it if such a thing is even possible. This is the nature of the nuclear era, and the era never drifted into suspension, even if our attention did. Trump snapped us out of our slumber, reminded those of us who were old enough to know, and informed those who weren't that the bomb is still here. In public over the years, officers and officials have described America's nuclear policy as a second strike deterrence. If an enemy strikes us with nuclear weapons, we will retaliate in kind. This retaliatory power is what deters the enemy from attacking us. In reality, though, American policy has always been to strike first preemptively, or in response to a conventional invasion of Allied territory, or to a biological or large-scale cyber attack. In any case, not just as an answer to nuclear attack. All of these options envision firing nuclear weapons at military targets for military ends. They envision the bomb as a weapon of war writ large. This vision has been enshrined in the American military's doctrines, drills, and exercises from the onset of the nuclear era through all its phases. Most presidents have been skeptical of this vision, morally, strategically, practically, but none of them have rejected it. Some have threatened to launch nuclear weapons first as a way of settling a crisis. The few who considered adopting a no first use policy, in the end, decided against it. There are rationales for these doctrines, drills, and exercises, and for the retention of the first use option. They are driven by policies, personalities, and bureaucratic rivalries, but also by a logic which, once its premises are accepted, hurls its adherents and the rest of us into a rabbit hole of increasingly bizarre scenarios that seem increasingly, if strangely, rational the deeper they're probed. Understanding the nuclear era, the era of our lifetime, means understanding the rabbit hole, who dug it, and how we got stuck inside. It means tracing the maze of its tunnels, which is to say the arc of its history. A story enmeshed in secrecy, some of it still secret, much of it now illuminated by declassified documents and interviews with key actors, though never fully told. How did we get to the second coming of nuclear panic? How did we wind up with thousands of nuclear weapons, far more than any war aims could justify? What propelled the nuclear arms race during the decades-long Cold War? And what happened to the weapons and their guardians after the Cold War ended? And how and why did any of this persist? This is the Thom Hartmann Book Club, the book Fred Kaplan's The Bomb.
Coming up on the Science Revolution, Noah Greenwald from the Center for Biological Diversity is here on Trump's latest actions to weaken the Endangered Species Act. You know, as we destroy the wild, we destroy ourselves. Dr. Justin A. Frank, MD, drops by and says it is terrifying to have a president who is psychotic and explains why Trump hates anyone who is loved. Former Assistant Secretary for Health under Obama, Dr. Howard Koh, tells us how Biden will handle this pandemic we're in. And lastly, in geeky science, we find out how our bones are made of stars. The Science Revolution, wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And, interesting. Jay in Bryant, Alabama says here you want to disagree with me, so you go to the front of the line. What's up?
Yeah, the McCluskeys in Missouri, you just said on your thing that people just walking by peacefully protesting. You forgot to mention that they not busted their gate in, come in, threatened to kill their dog, picked out the rooms they wanted to sleep in, threatened to kill them. It's a wonder the McCluskeys didn't take a few of them out. If you're going to tell a story...
You know, Jay, I have watched the video, and I saw none of that. I have watched the video, and I saw none of that. I even
called Mr. McCluskey and talked to him. I know the story. You get it right if you're going to say it on TV. That's what's wrong with y'all. Y'all just say what you want to say.
Jay, I will check it out. I will check it out. And if there's any truth to what you're saying, I will correct myself. Rudy in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Rudy, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having Professor Wolff on. I love it when you have him on. But I have a question. What brought LBJ to to make a statement when he said when you can convince the lowest white guy that he's as good as the highest black guy, that he would empty his pocket out? What brought him to say that? Because I mean, I have conservative friends, and I try to tell them, hey, man, this guy Trump is bad for business, man. I understand it may be tribal, but at the end of the day, the first thing that changes when things change is social change. And I remember Andre Agassi as a kid, and he said image is everything. You know, and I'm just trying to wrestle with these guys to make them
LBJ was
understand,
talking about Nixon's Southern strategy, Rudy.
Okay. Well, I just, I never understood what brought him to make that statement. So,
what he was pointing out was that the game that at that time, actually it wasn't entirely Republicans. You had, Strom Thurmond and James Eastland and a bunch of other Dixiecrat Democrats from the South who were playing the same game in the South. But basically what he was saying was, this is how they con you. If you can convince the lowest white man that he's higher than the highest black man, you can pick his pocket all day long, or words to that effect. And he was right, and he was calling out the strategy of these people who were trying to use, basically race as a device to bring poor white people onto the side of basically the oligarchs, the big business guys. So,
doesn't that apply now?
LBJ was.
It
certainly does. It's exactly what Donald Trump is doing, and he. Remember he had he had a rally where he said, "There's my black guy." it's like, he's talking to white people and he's saying the same thing.
I'm just trying to wrap my mind around it, because these are pretty good guys, and I'm we talk about everything besides religion and politics. That's the rule. And I'm like, hey man, you guys might want to rethink Trump, because socially this is damaging to white America. I mean, that's just the way I see it, and I just don't want to see them get caught up in it. I mean, it's ridiculous what this guy's selling. He's selling. Yeah. He's selling a bad product.
He is selling, let's be clear about it, Rudy, he is selling hatred based in race and religion and regionality.
I know
that, he is selling hatred. And, and sadly, there's always been a market for hatred in the United States, particularly racially based hatred. And we've got to push back on it by being better than that and by standing up to it. Rudy, I need to move along, but thank you for the call. Leonard in Phoenix. Hey, Leonard, what's on your mind today?
Thank you. Yes, I got to meet you many years ago here in Phoenix or in the area, so it was a great honor. My question is, I know you've heard this 10,000 times, but with the assassination of the political opponent to Putin, who is good buddies with Trump, and the apparent trying to kill off our postal service here all of a sudden with a lot more passion by Trump, do you think we are in a slow motion coup? I mean, I'm not just saying, we say these things all the time, but, looking at the Crimea, how Comrade Putin has done these things before, could we be in a slow motion coup? And do we know how many police chiefs across the country, DPS, governors? I mean, has somebody systematically sat down and figured out who would stand with this man? Has he got people lined up? Why are the militias quiet? That's my question to you. And again, it was an honor to meet you many years ago in Arizona. And thank you, Tom. We need you down here. We have no progressive radio in Arizona. We really need you.
Yeah. Thank you, Leonard.
Thank you.
I'm not sure I would describe it as a coup, because, a coup is basically when the power structure, when elements within a power structure, typically the military, take over the rest of the power structure. And in this case, Donald Trump was put in through an election, or at least through the Electoral College part of an election. And, that's very troubling, and it should trouble all of us. But I would say that, coup is not quite the right word, but what we're seeing is the corruption and intentional destruction of the United States of America. Steve Bannon famously said that the job of the Trump administration was to deconstruct the administrative state. Well, what's the administrative state? It's the federal government. What does deconstruct mean? Take apart. So their job is to destroy this government that George Washington had 3 horses shot out from underneath him trying to create. And literally hundreds of thousands of Americans have fought and died, or millions of Americans have fought, and many, thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands have died to preserve. And it's something on the bordering on blasphemy. I mean, this is just evil what's going on. Leonard, thank you for the call. Paul in Fort St. Lucie, Florida. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Hi. My question is about the secret society. There's a lot of talk about it.
Which one?
It comes up every once in a while, and I'm sure you know something about it, and books have been written about it. What can you say about it?
Well, I don't know. There are all kinds of conspiracy theories out there about
the presidents is supposed to be members.
Oh, you're talking about the QAnon conspiracy thing?
No, I believe that that's not attached to that. This is something else that books have been written about, the secret society that presidents are supposed to be members of, and
well, Skull and Bones was a big one for years. We had a lot of presidents who were graduates of Yale, and Skull and Bones was basically a secret society. I mean, George W. Bush was a member of that.
Right.
Whether it's some sort of evil bunch or whether it's just a bunch of college kids trying to be big shots, I honestly don't know. But Trump never went to Yale, so he's not a Skull and Bones member. George Bush did, his dad did, Reagan didn't. So Paul, I don't know. Get a little more information and call back again, and we can talk about it. Dave in New London, New Hampshire. Hey, Dave, what's up?
3 reasons Trump will not leave the country. 1,
okay,
his narcissism will not allow him to leave his adoring fans, i.e. Bedminster, Mar-a-Lago. 2, he will love living off the government in the form of his presidential pension and his medical care. And 3, he's just going to fight these things in court. And that's what he's always done, and that's how he'll handle it. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, I think he'll fight them until he dies of old age. It's and he may succeed. Although he lost yesterday in federal court, a judge said that Trump is challenging whether the district attorney or the state AG, no, I believe it was the attorney general, Letitia James, could have access to his tax records. And he's continuing to try to hide his taxes from the American people, which should cause us all to go, huh? But this judge said, sorry, you have not met the bar for that. So no pun intended. Dave, thanks for the call. Robert in Tyler, Texas. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm just worried why Nancy is so afraid of the GOP and Trump's followers, because every week we have documented atrocities that Trump and his whole organization have done to the Constitution, between Free Speech TV and Rachel Maddow and C-SPAN. There's so many documented cases. Why don't they just impeach him, Barr, McConnell, Pence, for all this stuff, just so we can have it on record and then use it against them after we get to win the election?
Robert, I think the simple answer to your question, and it's a really good question, because Trump has committed so many crimes against the United States, and actual crimes that are like prosecutable crimes, that he should be easily impeached. And I think the main reason why the Democrats haven't done that again is that they're afraid that trying to impeach him during an election cycle will just infuriate, anger, and motivate his followers, and at the very least could lead to violence.
They're going to be his followers regardless.
Oh, I agree with you, Robert, and I think that they should be impeaching him right now. I think they should be laying out his crimes for posterity. I'm with you. But, I'm telling you how they're thinking. They're thinking that it's not worth the political expense. I think that's a wrong calculation, but hey,
you're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls and the news of the day in just a moment. It's 45 minutes past the hour. The Thom Hartmann Program, talking about the truths the multinational corporations would really rather you didn't know about. And welcome back. David in Spotswood, New Jersey. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hey, one thing that's been driving me nuts, and nobody, I wish a news reporter would point it out, is when the Republicans go on and give their opposing view to the stimulus, which is basically you shouldn't be paying for blue states' expenses such as their pension liabilities. I wish a reporter would just counter-argue and say, well, can't these states, use their state taxation to use taxes and change their corporate tax rates so that it's prohibitive to do, prohibitive for those state residents to buy products from those states, and therefore, if they don't want to have federal stimulus, then we could do it on our own and deny these states commerce. In other words, we could deny the states that
that's an interesting idea. Go ahead.
Yeah, the states that would get bailed out would take it upon themselves through their own taxation methods, which actually doesn't make sense. It would be too far to the left. But what they're saying doesn't make sense either.
Yeah. The problem, David, is that prior to the Reagan era, pensions were considered a liability of a corporation. If a corporation, if your employer, David, had cut a deal with you and said, listen, you take $30 a week less in pay and we'll kick $30 a week into a pension fund, that was money that the corporation owed you, even though it was being administered and held in that pension fund. It was considered a debt, a debt that the company owed to you, the employee. Reagan changed that. He flipped that upside down. He said, no, that's not a debt. That's an asset. That's money that the company is holding in trust for David, but it's really still the company's money. It's not yet David's money. It won't be David's money until it gets paid out. And by doing that, what it allowed to have happen was, when Eastern Airlines and American Airlines and TWA and, United Airlines over and over and over again, for example, these are the well-known examples. They don't affect the Central States Fund, but it's exactly how it happened, or largely how it happened. When a corporation like that wants to get rid of their pension liabilities, they just declare bankruptcy. If it is an actual liability, then the outcome of the bankruptcy has to pay it off first. But if it's an asset, then that's considered the company's money and it gets split up among the creditors. So, you end up with the pension having a fraction of the original money in it. And that's what's happened. So, there's a dozen different ways we could try to get around this, like you're talking about. But basically what we need to do is we need to undo what Reagan did.
If I may just point out one thing, about 10 or 15 years ago, I happen to be a tax accountant. All the states changed the way they allocate income to a single factor. I don't need to get into the complications of it, but they changed it to a single factor test. In other words, just sales only. It used to be sales, payroll, real estate, and whatnot. So that's also led to the shortfalls in some of these pensions in some of these states, in that the states aren't collecting as much taxes as they used to.
Oh, that makes sense too. Yeah. David, it's a mess.
It's just disingenuous what these Republicans are saying.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And have been saying forever. I mean, Reagan was the first president to put a guy who hates labor in charge of the Labor Department. It's for example. And now we've got Eugene Scalia there, Antonin Scalia's son, who makes a living busting unions, running the Labor Department that is supposed to protect unions. It's crazy. David, thank you for the call. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. The Hidden History of Monopoly tells how Robert Bork, that guy from the Reagan era, transformed corporate America and destroyed the American dream. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. And welcome back, Sandra in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, what's on your mind today?
Oh, Tom, I was thinking about all that stack of bills that are sitting on McConnell's desk, and if in January we seat a new Senate that is a little bit more amenable and a sane person in charge, they could zip through all those bills pretty fast and become the most productive Senate, in history, since half the work is already done by the House already. And I wondered if...
Yeah, and Mitch McConnell showed us how to do that. What he did with judges, we need to do with legislation.
Yeah, exactly. Just rubber stamp, rubber stamp, rubber stamp. Let's get this done. And then we'll move on to the other new things that we have in mind also. So it's just something I had in mind.
Yeah. I am with you, Sandra. And, the key to what you just said in that thought experiment is that Republicans take the Senate. Democrats take the Senate. And push out the Republicans or take the power away from the Republicans. If that happens, then I have tremendous hope and faith in the future of my country. If that fails to happen, if Mitch McConnell, with all his money from Russian oligarchs and whatnot, continues to run this country, or at least run the Senate, which has so much power, then I am very, very concerned. Sandra, thank you for the call, and spot on. Chris in Port Washington, New York. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you? Good afternoon. So, Tom, listen, I'm reading Larry Bartel's book, Unequal Democracy, and I find it incredibly ironic that he cites this period in the 70s where corporates made a huge change from not being so politically active and not putting all their money behind candidates to becoming so at the same time when you talk about the Buckley decision and the First National Bank of Boston decision, which sort of started the process. And he goes on to document how this period and how Reagan exacerbated it, whereby the unequal income distribution in the United States started. And I don't think it's any small coincidence that it's right in line with those two decisions. But he doesn't seem to reference it, though. But I don't know why.
That's unfortunate. You know who wrote the Powell memo was Lewis Powell. He was a lawyer for the tobacco industry at the time. That was in 1971, and he was the one who said, "Okay, guys, we need to create think tanks. We need to take over the media. We need to take over the colleges. We need, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." He kicked that off. The next year, Richard Nixon put Lewis Powell on the Supreme Court. And you know who was the principal author of the First National Bank versus Bellotti decision that said that corporations can own politicians and it's considered free speech? Lewis Powell. Yep. Lewis Powell was the author of that decision. He voted for the Buckley decision. He authored the Bellotti decision, the First National Bank decision. And for an author to not connect those dots is almost malpractice. I mean, it's just, I think so obvious.
It makes my hair go on fire, too, when I talk about people who complain about, watching out for progressives because of, thinking about income redistribution. And meanwhile, it's happened on the other side of the field on an institutional basis to the degree, which is obviously unprecedented almost in our history. Yet they're completely blind to it, and it's happening right in front of their faces, in our faces.
Yeah, there you go. Chris, thank you for the call. Brian in Champaign, Illinois. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Hi, I'd like to address the couple from St. Louis. That gentleman said you're going to tell a story. Well, I'd suggest he go read the St. Louis Dispatch about the expose they wrote on this couple. They have a long history of being very controversial in the community. For example, the guy tried to designate in front of his little mansion there that was a private drive and nobody could park on a public street. He went down the street and destroyed a beehive of a Jewish temple and then tried to sue the temple for creating the hazard when he was the one that destroyed the beehive.
I remember that.
They're
so my guess was that the sequence, if people did damage his property, my guess would be the sequence was protesters walk by on their way to somebody else's house, to protest. He comes out with a gun. Protesters come back, the next day or something, and trash his place. I mean, is that what happened?
No, I think they were on their way, and I think they were on their way to the mayor's house or somebody of influence.
Yeah, it was. They were going to a different place altogether, and he and his wife came out with their guns and pointed them at the protesters. At that point, there had not been any destruction of his property, had there?
No, and the gate they keep referring to, that picture is a gate to a private house. That's not the gate to that community. That gate to that community is a historical landmark, and it's broken anyway. It's been there since the Civil War or something like that too. So it's right wing propaganda, and he's trying to pump it into your show, and it's like, I always cross-reference things like that, and I wouldn't waste my time looking it up, Tom. and by the way, thank you for the work you do.
Thank you, Brian. I will look it up though. But I appreciate your comment. I just, as a matter of principle, as a talk show host, I just can't take somebody who calls in and says something and say, oh, that must be how it is. But I can certainly check things, and your statement. I remember the story about the beehive, and I remember reading that story. After the whole gun incident happened, that story came out. But the whole, oh my God, we are victims of vandals and all this kind of stuff. I'm going to have to check it out. We'll be back. Stick around. Let's see. Oh yeah, Lori Lodes is going to be with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan co-worker, or the beloved musician who gives off a sorceress vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit. Try to pin her down and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft. Not to mention riot girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age. Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross via a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic, entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine. My grandma Trudy was a librarian at the West Long Branch Library, which meant I got to spend many a long afternoon lurking between the 001.9 and 135 Dewey Decimal sections, reading about Bigfoot and dream interpretation and Nostradamus. Waking the Witch by Pam Grossman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. You will recall, day before yesterday, I did a rant and also published an op-ed over at commondreams.org about how the Republican Party, basically arguably since the 70s, certainly since 1980, has been one long grift, basically a con job that, when Republicans and conservatives talk about individual responsibility, what they're basically saying is that, minorities haven't succeeded because they failed to take individual responsibility. Let's ignore structural racism. When they talk about small government, what they're really saying is government is the only force, literally the only force that can protect communities from polluting corporations or giant banks that want to rip people off. And of course, they don't want people to be protected from that. And, that these code words basically are just a scam. It's fascinating to watch that. I've been watching this my whole entire life, and now Rick Perlstein comes along. He's got a new book out. He's the former chief national correspondent for the Village Voice, former columnist with the New Republic and Rolling Stone, journalist and contributing writer with The Nation. His latest, he's got this series of books. ReaganLand before this, and there was another one before that, and it's called ReaganLand, America's Right Turn, 1976 through 1980. It is a doorstop. It's a massive book, but it is absolutely brilliant. Rick Perlstein, welcome to the program. So glad to have you back with us.
Oh, it's so great, Tom. I love how you've kind of educated your listenership about Reaganism. You bring in history into your radio stuff, and long-time listener, I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate a chance to do it with you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I mean, you are one of America's great historians, and your writing is brilliant. What would you say to what I just said about, is there any part of, what prompted me to do this Tuesday, I think it was that morning on Morning Joe, Scarborough had on David Frum and George Will, and they were talking about we need to return to conservative values of limited government and personal responsibility. And I'm like, these are code words for BS. What do you think about what I said?
George Will.
And how does this play out?
George Will in the book, because
so tell me about it.
he was helping the Reagan team prepare for the big debate with Carter in 1980. And of course, as you know, they stole a briefing book from the Carter campaign, so they knew what he was going to say. And George Will, who, was a reporter and also commented on the debate on ABC, not only didn't mention this in his role as a journalist that, they were cheating, but he actually went on TV afterwards and said that Reagan had done a great job and exactly why he had done a great job without revealing that he was literally on Team Reagan. Immediately comes to mind, before bringing up the fact that, Steve Bannon, was just arrested on his boat for a straight up con job, emptying the wallets of hardworking Americans, by claiming that the money was going to go to the wall. What can I say? Yeah. And the reason they have to, con people is one thing that I kind of sow throughout the book is statistics showing how unpopular their policies always have been, right? And one example was on Election Day. At that time, 35% of Americans agreed that social programs should be cut, right? Reagan wins, but it's not because he says social programs should be cut. It's because he, basically says, I'm going to give everyone a tax cut, and then it's going to cause a miracle of the loaves and fishes. These magic beans are going to stretch a beanstalk all the way to the sky, and we're going to climb to heaven. And of course, it was all nonsense, but it worked. And one of the reasons it worked was because Jimmy Carter kind of retreated from the and gave working class Americans very little to vote for.
Back in the 1700s, when these
there you go.
This divide,
there you go again.
When this divide between conservative and liberal became fairly evident, the previous debates between Hobbes and Rousseau, and then kind of Locke, cutting the baby down the middle, all that stuff. Edmund Burke, Thomas Paine, wanted to go visit the French Revolution, and he stayed with Edmund Burke for 2 weeks on his way to France to get arrested.
That's amazing.
Got so
That's a movie
pissed
right
off
there.
Yeah, it really is. And he got so pissed off at Burke that he wrote an entire book as a rebuttal of Burke. It was called The Rights of Man.
Yeah.
But Burke was honest about conservatism. He came right out and said, conservatism is an embrace of aristocracy. We believe that there should be classes and orders.
Right.
And then Russell Kirk in 1951 in The Conservative Mind, his opening chapter is about Burke and how there should be classes and orders within society, you know, with white men at the top and all this kind of stuff, and warned us about what would happen if women got power or minorities got power in America. And that was the book that kicked off the, you know, the modern conservative era. Why don't Republicans simply say, and conservatives simply say or admit the truth? You know, we think that you can't trust the people. We think there should be aristocracy, and we're the aristocrats.
Well, I think you just answered your own question, right? I mean, Burke is interesting. He does say what you say he said. But I just actually recently reread Burke after finishing my book, and I read it in tandem with the Oxford History of the French Revolution. And one of the fascinating things about Burke is he's about as reliable a reporter on what was happening in France as Fox News is. There was all kinds of cutting and special pleading and trolling. It's very interesting. You can hear a lot of today's Fox News rhetoric in this very snarky, trolly guy, Edmund Burke, who, yes, at least had the honesty to say, England does it right. We have a king. We have an aristocracy. It's working great. Things were working great in France. That was basically his version of the kind of supply-side economics nonsense. They can't sell that, right? They can't sell the idea because we're Americans. We believe in equality. We believe in freedom. So they call making it harder for people to join a union right to work, right? Because I described this in my first book about the whole idea of taking all the labor organizers in the town and putting them in a boxcar, dropping them off in the middle of the desert, doesn't sell, in the era of TV, So, yes, you see that over and over and over again. And there's zillions of examples of in the book. It's a veritable compendium of nonsense, grifting. And one of the things that's very frustrating about it is a lot of the people who fall for this were the mainstream media, right, who were very, very hard on Jimmy Carter, but very, very easy on, I almost said Donald Trump, Ronald Reagan. And they were very easy on some Falwell, who's a big character in the book. Jerry Falwell becomes a very big figure. The moral majority starts the year before. He endorses Reagan lustily, and he gets to write op-eds in places like the Los Angeles Times saying, Christians aren't fairly represented in government. We're just another, pluralist group in America's rich pageant. Meanwhile, I have a pamphlet he wrote that's absolutely astonishing about nuclear war, in which he reads the signs in the New Testament and in the book of Daniel and prophecy to explain very explicitly how a war is going to happen with Russia and America, down to the troop movements, the number of troops and where they're moving. And then the last page says, and then basically there's going to be a nuclear explosion, and won't that be a wonderful thing? I mean, that's how crazy
and everybody
that's being laundered.
Everybody gets raptured. It is nuts. We have just a half a minute left, Rick. I'm sorry, hard breaks and all that, but we're talking with Rick Perlstein, the author of ReaganLand. Is there any piece of the conservative sales pitch that actually has integrity?
Wow, you stumped me. I'm usually not at a loss for words. I think there are conservatives that have integrity. I think that the sales pitch is, at bottom it's a con. It's a big con.
Amazing. The book is ReaganLand. You're going to want to read this book. Rick Perlstein is the author. America's Right Turn, 1976 to 1980. Rick, thanks so much for dropping by. It's great talking with you. Keep up the great work.
Thanks. Cheers.
It is so much fun to geek out on history with a fellow history geek. 15 minutes before or after the hour. We'll be back in just a minute.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Stick around, more of the news of the day and your calls. And check out ReaganLand by Rick Perlstein right after this. And welcome back. Joan in Rochester, Minnesota. Hey, Joan, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
I watch you all the time. I listened to you on Air America 2 years ago. I had seen you were talking about the secret societies and so forth, and back in the early 20s, there was that TV guy that I used to watch, showed he had snuck into the Bohemian Grove to spy on the Bilderberg group, and they showed a ritual where they had an altar, and they had a person dressed in a hood was performing some ritual at this altar, and all this was a very secret meeting, and it had a lot of the Harvard and all these ritzy graduates. And I don't know that anybody watched this show very much, but it came through on the college channel that I watched in the town I lived in, and it was very amazing that something like that could be sponsored and practiced by people that were educated and so forth and held secret. But it was called the Bohemian Grove, and it was the Bilderberg group. And I just wanted, I didn't know if you were aware of that or not.
I'm very aware of both. The Bilderberger group is there's a hotel in Europe, and that I believe it's the hotel is named Bilderberger or is owned by, and that's where one society was meeting. The Bohemian Grove is a private for-profit operation. Well, maybe it's nonprofit, I don't know, but it's a private operation in California that is separate from the Bilderbergers, but tries to bill itself as kind of an American secret society. Reagan was a big guest there. A friend of mine's father is actually a member. Had his foot peed on once by Henry Kissinger. The rich and powerful hang out there, and they do these bizarre kind of pseudo. What would you call it? Pseudo-pagan rituals. They kind of delight in them.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah, and these are. I mean, this is lifestyles of the rich and famous. I mean, these are politically powerful people who hang out there. And I don't know if they've canceled it this year because of COVID. I'm guessing they probably have. But, every summer they get together, or whenever it is, every year they get together at the Bohemian Grove. And there have been some good documentaries on it. There was a really long, in-depth piece in Rolling Stone magazine about the Bohemian Grove, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, 15 years ago.
Yeah, this was a long time ago, yes, that I saw that.
Yeah.
And one other thing I just want to say, Steve Bannon gave a speech in 2013 saying he was going to run this country into the ground, and it looks like he's off to a good start. Just wanted to let you know that. Okay,
he came right out and said that
I love your program. Watch it all the time.
Okay, thank you very much, Joan. And yes, to Joan's comment about Steve Bannon, he did come out and say that the goal of the Trump administration was to, quote, deconstruct the administrative state. Now, deconstruct is a fancy polysyllabic word for take apart or destroy. And the administrative state is government geek speak for our federal government. So, I mean, they came right out and said it when they took power. Our job is to destroy the American government. The question is, on whose behalf are they doing it? Is it just billionaires who want deregulation and tax cuts? Is it foreign oligarchs? Is it, foreign, is it, Putin? I mean, who is it? We'll be back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Daily rants and weekly op-eds at HartmannReport.com. It's free and there's no ads. HartmannReport.com. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. My new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. American monopolies dominate, control, and consume most of the energy of our entire economic system. They function the same as cancer does in a body. And like cancer, they weaken our systems while threatening to crash the entire body economic. American monopolies have also seized massive political power and use it to maintain their obscene profits and CEO salaries while crushing small competitors. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, quote, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series. Available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We had Lori on the line. I don't see her any longer on line 10 there, or 9. Oh, okay. She'll be on at the bottom of the hour. Okay. Well, let me pick up a couple of more things here, and then I'll pick up your phone calls, of course. And Trump's Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, has been recently criticized for saying that he wants to cut funding for military health benefits, for health care benefits for people who are active serving members of the military and for retired military. And, you know, he wanted to cut the health care budget of the Pentagon. Now, keep in mind, the Pentagon just got the largest infusion of cash in history. And he wanted to cut that by $2.2 billion. Which would definitely hurt 9.5 million active duty personnel, military retirees, and their dependents. So why did he want to cut $2.2 billion out of military health care? Well, because he says those health care losses can be made up with private insurance. And he says that will eliminate inefficiencies. Because, you know, when the government provides health care to people, they're not skimming money off the top, they're just providing health care. But when private corporations are providing health care to people, they're skimming 10, 20, 30% off the top, putting it in their pocket, sharing it with their investors, spending money on marketing and advertising and everything else. And that's more efficient somehow, magically. I mean, you know, really? Eliminate inefficiencies? And he says Trump realized that optically this was bad, so he tweeted on Monday, quote, "A proposal by Pentagon officials to slash military health care by $2.2 billion has been firmly and totally rejected by me. We will do nothing to hurt our great military professionals and heroes as long as I am your president. Thank you." But Esper had actually already done this. Now, the question is whether he's able to carry it out and, you know, how this is going to play out. People inside the Defense Department are not happy with this, frankly. They're, you know, hey, if they're Pentagon employees, if they're in the military, their health care just got cut. But, you know, this is why is Esper doing this? Well, it turns out it's the same reason DeJoy is taking multi-million-dollar high-speed sorting machines that can do the work of 30 or 40 or 50 people and hauling them out into the parking lot and cutting them up into scrap metal and throwing them in dumpsters, as we saw documented by a WOOD TV in Grand Rapids by a reporter from Wood TV, showing the machine, showing the cables that have been cut. And yesterday, DeJoy said, no, we're not going to reinstall those machines. They're gone. They're destroyed. And apparently 50, 60 of these machines have been destroyed so far. But they're doing the same thing in the Pentagon for the same reason. In Republican world, anything the government can do well for the people should be done by a for-profit corporation so that a billionaire can make a buck. That's literally what it comes down to. And it always has. In 1920, Warren Harding ran for president of the United States on the Republican ticket, and his slogan was, less government in business, more business in government. Now think about that for a minute. Less government in business, deregulate. More business in government, privatize. Deregulate and privatize. Increase profits, decrease oversight. Eliminate the protections for the average person, eliminate protections for workers, eliminate protections for consumers, eliminate protections for communities, eliminate protections for minorities, eliminate all these protections because they hinder profitability. And to the extent that government has got anything that people really love, whether it's Social Security, whether it's Medicare, whether it's the Postal Service, whether it's the Department of Defense Health Service, the Veterans Administration, whatever it may be, pass it off to some billionaire who will kick money back to you in the form of campaign contributions to make sure that you get reelected. Or even better, the new scam that Trump is running that had only previously been run, I don't think it had ever been run by a president, but it had been run by members of Congress. Paul Ryan is one of the masters of this, and is create a super PAC while you're in office, have your donors, these people that you gave the favors to, pour millions and millions of dollars into those super PACs, into that super PAC, and then after you retire from public life, you can use that money yourself. There are some small restrictions on how you can use it, but, hey, if you want to buy a yacht and call it a business expense, no problem. You want to take your family on a world tour, 50 days around the world for a couple, $1 million, and use the super PAC money, no problem. And Trump is doing that now. It's all about greed. It's all about extracting as much as you can from that institution that was created of, by, and for we the people, our government. That institution that Ronald Reagan told us was the problem. Yes, it's the problem if you run an oil refinery. It's a problem if you want to break a union. It's a problem if you're a bank and you want to steal from your customers. Government becomes a problem then. Reagan was right. But if you want to be protected from these predators, these Republican billionaire predators, government is the only thing that can protect you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with your calls and the news of the day right after this. There are open lines. Stick around.
Exactly can we do about the Electoral College? People have been trying to answer that question for more than 2 centuries. Since the first proposed amendment to the Electoral College was introduced in Congress in 1797, there have been more than 700 attempts to reform or abolish it, more by far than any other provision of the Constitution. Only one has succeeded, the 12th Amendment, which was ratified in 1804 to fix a technical flaw in the college's design, but left it otherwise intact. In the late 1960s, an amendment abolishing the college and replacing it with a national popular vote passed the House of Representatives and came extraordinarily close in the Senate, but was blocked by a filibuster. At the time, 80% of the American public supported switching to the popular vote, as did President Richard Nixon and other top Republicans and Democrats. To some, this litany of failures speaks to itself. I think it's a waste of time to talk about changing the Electoral College, former President Jimmy Carter said in 2000. Carter had supported a national popular vote in the 60s and the 70s. I would predict that 200 years from now, we'll still have the Electoral College, he said. Was President Carter right? Is it simply our fate as Americans to remain trapped by the historical quirks of a Constitution that is too easy to revere and too hard to change? Especially after the failed effort in the 60s, when American politics were far less polarized to today, and there was no simple partisan divide over the issue. It's clear that a constitutional amendment is not in the cards. But there may be another way. It's called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, an agreement among states to award all of their electors to the winner of the national popular vote rather than the winner of their statewide vote. The compact will take effect when it is joined by states representing a majority of electoral votes, 270, thus guaranteeing that the candidate who wins the most votes in the country becomes president. The ingenuity of the compact is that it doesn't touch the Constitution. Its target is the statewide winner-take-all rule, currently in use in 48 states. Maine and Nebraska are the exceptions. This rule is what makes presidents out of popular vote losers. It incentivizes presidential campaigns to ignore more than 100 million American voters living in non-competitive states, turning what should be a national electoral contest into a series of bitter, hyper-local brawls. It focuses nearly all campaign spending and policy proposals on a few so-called battleground states, where even a small shift in voting can lead to an electoral jackpot for one side or another. That familiar red and blue map we all obsess over every 4 years, it's nothing but a visual representation of state winner-take-all rules, with each state stamped Democratic or Republican, as though that is its true identity, regardless of how many voters from the other party cast a ballot there. This is bad for democracy, and it should concern all Americans, no matter where they live or which political party they support. In contrast, when candidates know that all votes are equal, and they need a majority of them to win, they're forced to seek the support of all Americans and craft policies that appeal to as many people as possible. The Popular Vote Compact was launched in 2006 and got its first member state, Maryland, the following year. As of October 2019, 15 states in the District of Columbia, together representing 196 electoral votes, had joined. 74 more, and the compact takes effect. So far, only Democratic majority states have joined the compact. And while the 2016 election dealt a significant setback to efforts to enlist Republican-led states, lawmakers of both parties around the country continue to support it, and Republican-led chambers have passed it in 4 states. Critics of the compact call it an end run around the Constitution. And it's true that the Constitution's framers never mentioned something like a popular vote compact. They also never mentioned the winner-take-all rule, but that didn't stop the majority of states from rapidly adopting it to benefit themselves. That's the whole point of the compact. The framers gave states near total control over how to allocate their electors. The fact that the compact is an agreement among states also means that, unlike a constitutional amendment, which is effectively permanent, member states may back out if they later decide they don't want to be a part of it. Opponents of the popular vote argue that no matter how you might achieve it, it's not the way our country is built. As the popular saying goes, we're a republic, not a democracy. The Electoral College is one of the core Republican elements of the framers' constitutional design, like the Senate and the Supreme Court, which are there precisely to prevent majorities from running rampant. In other words, majority rule is not our only organizing principle, and perhaps not even our most important. There are 2 problems, however, with this argument. The minor one is on the surface and involves terminology. The United States is both a republic and a representative democracy. The 2 terms describe the same thing, a government in which the people hold the ultimate power but elect representatives to make laws, policies, and other decisions on their behalf. The founders used the term republic to distinguish what they were building from a monarchy. For them, democracy generally referred to the direct variety, as in ancient Athens or the New England town meeting, where the people literally make the laws themselves. But American politics at the national level has never been and never will be a direct democracy. So any distinction between the terms today is meaningless. As one political columnist put it, to say that the U.S. is a republic and not a democracy is like claiming to eat beef and pork, but not cows and pigs. The bigger problem with the saying is the implication that lies beneath it. The book, Let the People Pick the President, by Jesse Wegman.
Coming up on the Science Revolution, Noah Greenwald from the Center for Biological Diversity is here on Trump's latest actions to weaken the Endangered Species Act. You know, as we destroy the wild, we destroy ourselves. Dr. Justin A. Frank, MD, drops by and says it is terrifying to have a president who is psychotic, and explains why Trump hates anyone who is loved. Former Assistant Secretary for Health under Obama, Dr. Howard Koh, tells us how Biden will handle this pandemic we're in. And lastly, in Geeky Science, we find out how our bones are made of stars. The Science Revolution, wherever fine podcasts are available. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. Hey, my new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. We're having a coronavirus-safe book tour. I'll be at Powell's virtual bookstore event in conversation with David Corton, Tuesday, August 25th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Go to powells.com and get your tickets for the live stream event. And on Friday, September 4th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, I'll be at a Town Hall Seattle virtual event, and you can get your tickets for that live stream event at townhallseattle.org. There are also links at thomhartmann.com. I'll be taking you from the birth of America through FDR to the Reagan Revolution and today. In the foreword of my book, Ralph Nader says, "This is the most important, dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. So be sure to go to thomhartmann.com and sign up for one of these 2 great virtual book signings. Powell's in Portland and Town Hall Seattle. Don't miss it and sign up now. Tag you're it. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Boy, what a day. On the line with us is the Obama administration alum, Executive Director of Climate Power 2020, Lori Lodes. ClimatePower2020.org is the website, and Lori's Twitter handle is Lori L. Lori, welcome to the program. Whoop, did I forget to put Lori on the board? I did. Lori, entirely my fault. I'm sorry. Hey, glad to have you with us.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. There you go. Yeah, thank you. So Kamala Harris and Mike Pence both have fairly easily measured, defined, nailed down, identified, pointed to climate policies. Tell us about Mike Pence's climate policy first, and then contrast that with Kamala Harris's.
Well, it's pretty simple. One believes in science and one does not. And it really has, it's their worldview and sort of how they've approached climate. So with Mike Pence, the current vice president, when he was back in governor of Indiana, his sort of lack of understanding or appreciation or caring about science helped exacerbate an HIV pandemic at that time across Indiana. And he turned his back on Black communities. East Chicago was dealing with a lead water problem and nothing. He wouldn't get involved. And so, and obviously he doesn't think it's real. He believes it's a hoax just as much as his boss does. And so what that means is that he's not going to do anything. There is not going to be any sort of urgency to act or appreciation that we have such a narrow window to get things done, because he just doesn't care. He doesn't believe in the science. He's not going to listen to the experts. And that sort of led us to where we are today with coronavirus, too. And so I think, if you're wanting to look at what climate crisis would look like under Mike Pence, we are looking at it right now with what's going on with coronavirus. And, of course, everything that Senator Harris believes stands in stark contrast for that. And she's really been a champion for the environment and specifically around environmental justice.
I didn't know that she had been working with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on these issues. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so right before she was nominated, I really think it was like a week, 10 days beforehand, she sponsored with Representative Ocasio-Cortez on the Climate Equity Act. And what this does is just really make sure that you are taking into account the impacts on people when you are doing any sort of project in a community. And so it really is just an important sort of benchmark that we need to be reaching toward. But she's also, not only is she, introduced legislation, this goes way back for her. When she was Attorney General of California, she took on the oil company. She held them accountable and sued them for environmental pollution. And that includes people like Chevron and BP, like the big guys. She took them on directly. And I think that's what's exciting about, Biden picking somebody like her, is she has this track record. And so now it's how do we, get them to take the bold sort of action we need, hopefully in 2021.
Tell me about Attorneys General for Clean Power. What is this group, and what role did Kamala Harris, AG Harris back then, now Senator Harris, play in that?
Mm-hmm. So she was one of the folks that was really pushing it, right? And this was the case against Exxon to really put, once again, to hold these corporations accountable. And she was there along with, I'm sorry, were you talking about the Clean Power Plan? It was on the car side of the equation.
AG's
right?
United for Clean Power, yeah.
Right. So she was very involved. And I think that is the sort of, record she has, whether it is pushing back on car standards being overturned or holding the car companies accountable from the get-go to reach the standards that they needed to, as well as the fossil fuel industry. She has this in-depth track record that really, it's exciting, I think, for people like myself who are really pushing for bold climate action to know that she has been there before. And she has really pushed for this sort of accountability that we're going to have if we're going to get ourselves into a much better place.
We're talking with Lori Lodes, the Executive Director of ClimatePower2020.org. Lori, last question here. What would your priorities be for a Biden-Harris administration, right out of the gate with regard to climate legislation?
Well, honestly, I am just so focused on getting through November 4th. I think last night was a very good indicator of the sort of momentum we're having on climate. In the past 3 nights, there's been over 53 mentions, or probably more. There is more than that, with different speakers talking about climate. And that's not about one policy solution, but on the idea that we need transformative, mobilizing, bold action to be able to address this issue in the time we need and to have the sort of outcomes that we want. And so we'll see, we can debate and talk about the policy in 2021. Right now, it's all about trying to make sure that climate is part of the conversation so that we have momentum to have that conversation.
Brilliant. Lori Lodes, the Executive Director, ClimatePower2020.org. Lori, thanks so much for dropping by today. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks, Tom. Great. Bye.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. 42 minutes past the hour. Let's pick up some phone calls here. Myron in Mobile, Alabama. Hey, Myron, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing? My Paul Revere that's warning against corruption there. I just wanted to make a point about that pension plan that was forced on the post office. Can you hear me?
I can.
Well, the GOP parked that money there in advance so they can steal it once they privatized it, because they will then become the new managers of those accounts. So they pre-planned this heist years in advance just to keep that money there for the picking.
Yep.
So this is one of the reasons why they want to get rid of the post office. It's not just the voting, but they also want to steal that pension plan that's parked there.
I agree. There's tens of billions of dollars. I've seen different numbers: $80 billion, $110 billion. But there is a huge pile of money, and whoever privatizes the post office, now it might be Louis DeJoy's company, God only knows, but whoever privatizes the post office is going to make off with it, and that's their plan. Myron, thank you. Andy in Minneapolis. Hey, Andy, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I'm hearing something, about the post office and about, like you just talked about, the VA and the medical benefits. But there's another thing that's happening with the government, where they're Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the agencies that run that. Just the other day, they've announced that they're charging a 0.5% fee. Where basically that fee is calculated on the loan amount. So if you have a $100,000 loan, that's a $500 fee that they're going to take regardless of when you have the application. You can apply today, and that still will be charged. Just came out of nowhere just the other day, and I think it harmed basically a lot of homeowners and payments, just basically charging more money just for a homeowner to get a lower payment, especially in these times. And my theory on that is, if they're going to take these fees, they're trying to get out of being under control. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, as everybody might recall, was put under governmental control like about a decade ago from the financial crisis. And I think that this is a move to privatize and move that away from, keeping the checks and balances on these risky and predatory loans.
Could be. I don't know the details of what you're talking about, Andy, but I will poke around and see what I can find. But yeah, your theory makes a lot of sense to me. Andy, thanks a lot for the call and for the information. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, talk media for the sane left among us. The numbers seem to be growing, actually. I'm seeing a wave of sanity washing across America. It's a wonderful thing.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And back with your calls right after this. And welcome back. Dion in Everett, Washington. Hey, Dion, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm just following up on an earlier caller who was talking about a secret organization that's funding leaders. I believe he was referring to the family. Basically, there's a Netflix series on right now about it. Yeah. That's it. That's all I had.
Yeah. Yeah, Jeff Charlotte is absolutely brilliant. He wrote this book, The Family, about, was it David Coe's organization? Or maybe his first name isn't Coe. Doug Coe. Doug Coe's organization. And, you know, they sponsor the National Prayer Breakfast. They've got this house in Washington, D.C., where members of their cult, who are also members of Congress, can live for very cheap, if not free, and, you know, using their tax-exempt status. I'm in the documentary, actually, which is kind of cool. You can see it on Netflix. I think it's 5 weeks or 5 parts, you know, 5 one-hour shows, maybe 4. And, you know, Jeff has been on this program many, many times. So spot on, Dion. Spot on. Thanks a lot for the call. Mary in Elderberry, Missouri. Hey, Mary, what's up?
Oh, yeah, I was pertaining about the Postal Department. I know this morning on the ABC TV that they were showing that some 4 different cities, I don't know if they're postal employees because they wanted to keep secret their identity, but they had shot pictures of 4 different warehouses where all the postal machinery are being put into.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, I mean, they didn't say whether any of them
Missouri?
had been destroyed. Yes. No, not in Missouri. It was, it didn't. On the ABC, it didn't say the location. That they had 4 different locations where reporters had found out from, and you know, people they didn't want to tell who they were, and they showed pictures of they opened the doors and they showed pictures of different machineries and different warehouses.
Yeah. These guys are on a tear, and it turns out that they've been on this tear apparently for the better part of 2 years. That they've been destroying the post office, and but slowly, steadily, and now, you know, DeJoy has sped it up because there's an election coming. But this is just criminal. It's absolutely criminal. Mary, thank you for the call. Along those same lines, Rich in Cathedral City, California, you have a question about this?
Tom, do we know how many machines DeJoy has destroyed? The sorting machines?
I have heard 56. I have heard 60. I have heard over 30. I've heard, you know, different numbers from different people. The post office has never issued a number and has not been transparent about this. Maybe we'll find out next week in the hearings before the House and Senate. But that's all I've heard so far, Rich.
I hope that's the main thing they're concerned with, is stopping that and putting them back in place immediately.
Well, they're taking them apart. I mean, they're destroying these machines. They're taking them apart. I don't think there's any way any of these machines can be reinstalled in time for the election, because some of these machines take, you know, 6 months to a year to install. They're huge, complicated pieces of equipment that are run by computer. You have to program the computers. They literally have cut, you know, big bundles of cables and things. The vandalism that the Trump administration has perpetrated against the post office is breathtaking. It's absolutely breathtaking.
I say this is not
and they had 671 of these machines slated to be destroyed. Apparently, so far, they've only gotten 50 or 60 of them, but we don't know. We don't know. And we damn well better find out. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a minute. It's 49 minutes, or coming up on 50 minutes, after the hour, 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. Thom Hartmann here with you, fair and only slightly unbalanced. The hidden history of the war on voting tells how the GOP has been stealing elections for decades and will again this year unless we stop them. Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour. Marge in La Puebla, New Mexico. Hey, Marge, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm calling to remark that I'm so impressed with the Democratic Convention coverage, the production of it. I love the precision of it, and I think it seems to me it would be about 12 hours if they were to convert it into a DVD, and be great fundraiser for the party if they'd stay reasonable in the price. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm guessing, though, that they'll just give it away, that they'll put it up on Netflix or something. But I agree, Marge. I think the production values have been spectacular. I think the presentations have been great. I was a little nonplussed when Kamala Harris was speaking to a big empty room. I thought that it would have been much more intimate if she was, sitting behind a desk or sitting at a kitchen table or living room, whatever.
Yeah, I agree.
Not to stereotype her as a woman with a kitchen, but I think that you learn from these things, but I'm with you. Go ahead.
Question time, real quick. You talked about the New Republic article this morning. Who was the author?
Which article was that about, or what was the topic?
The New Republic about the Supreme Court versus the Congress in terms of law.
Oh.
Who rules?
Oh, I'm very sorry. That is now in my pile of trash here. Let me see if I can quickly find it. I am. No, I've gone through so many pieces of paper here. But I'm sorry. You should, I found it on Raw Story is where I saw the story originally. And it was something like, this is a way to get around Trump's judicial appointments. So go check out rawstory.com and just try, plug into their search engine the word judicial and it should come up. Marge, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Ann in Seattle. Hey, Ann, what's up?
Hey, Tom, you talked about sanity. And for me, what I'm hearing, what I've been faced with the virus and all that, it's just all insanity. It evokes just craziness that everything is equated to money. And when you think about it, there's people like Bezos that has, well, let me back up. There are 8 billion of us on the world, maybe, right? And
7 plus.
Assets, yeah, his assets are 145 billion. And there are the 10% that equate to all of that and is just insanity. So I don't get it. Why can't we just all have what we need? We can have it. All of us. Immigrants, refugees, everyone can have what they need if these people would stop. There's
well, and we used to have guardrails. We used to have systems that stopped massive amounts of greed. Yeah, no, I get it. Ann, thank you very much. We used to have guardrails. We used to have, when taxes are above 50%, it discourages business owners and business, and investors from basically stealing money from workers. Reagan undid that. He dropped our tax rate below 50%. And boom, suddenly rich people started getting massively more rich. We used to have rules that prevented monopolies from forming. This is my latest book. We used to have laws against monopoly in the United States, and corporations couldn't get too big and couldn't get too corrupt and couldn't get too powerful. And now they are. Because in 1983, Ronald Reagan stopped enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act and the Clayton Antitrust Act and the Antitrust Act of 1956. And no president has started enforcing those laws since then because, frankly, I think they're afraid of these big corporations that Reagan unleashed. He let them get so giant. And you're absolutely right. Now there's this massive amount of wealth being held in a very, very small number of very private hands. John in Petersburg, Illinois. Hey, John, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, how you doing? This is John.
Good.
What do you think will happen if Mr. Biden gets elected, how the changes will be?
Well, if we simply were to return to sanity, I would be all in favor of that. But, everything that I'm hearing about moving in a very progressive direction, I find very encouraging. I would love to think that a Biden-Harris administration would be the second coming of FDR. I'm holding my breath. I have hoped for that with previous Democratic presidents and didn't quite get it. But if this is enough of a blowout, if this is enough of a landslide, and if enough of us get active, I think that's what we could end up with. John, thanks for the call. Tim in Redding, California. Hey, Tim, what's up? We have 1 minute.
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. Appreciate your show. Real quickly, I urge all of your listeners to contact their local postmaster general, file a complaint about Mr. DeJoy, Trump's crony, and with the board of directors, and ask the postmaster general, local, to put in very stern words and a demand that they fire. The Board of Governors has the right to fire Mr. DeJoy and reverse everything he has enacted so that we can have a safe and a better post office system.
Tim, your local postmaster general does not have that kind of power, to the best of my knowledge. The people you want to be talking to are Republican members of the House and Senate. And put the fear of God in them, electorally speaking, that this is going to be a blowout if they don't do something. And they got to do something fast. Thanks so much for being with us today. By the way, if you want to call your Republican member of Congress, 202-224-3121. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. Anything Goes Friday. And in the meantime, get out there, get active, tag You're It. Democracy depends on you this year. It really does. Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more info, teeth.com, code TOM. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
Hi, Thom Hartmann here. Hey, my new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. We're having a coronavirus-safe book tour. I'll be at Powell's virtual bookstore event in conversation with David Corton, Tuesday, August 25th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Go to powells.com and get your tickets for the live stream event. And on Friday, September 4th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, I'll be at a Town Hall Seattle virtual event, and you can get your tickets for that live stream event at townhallseattle.org. There are also links at thomhartmann.com. I'll be taking you from the birth of America through FDR to the Reagan Revolution and today. In the foreword of my book, Ralph Nader says, "This is the most important, dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. So be sure to go to thomhartmann.com and sign up for one of these two great virtual book signings, Powell's in Portland and Town Hall Seattle. Don't miss it and sign up now. Tag You're It.
We say fight back!